I know that this sounds insane. Heck, if someone told me this story, I'd think that they were either lying or dreaming. But I swear to you, every word that I'm about to tell you is true. It all started about 2 weeks ago. I had just moved into a new apartment after a messy breakup. The place was cheap, small but clean, and I was just grateful to have a bed to sleep in, to be honest. The first night was when I noticed it too. Just as I was about to drift off, I had this odd sensation, like I was being watched. You know that sort of electrical prickle at the back of your neck? That eerie stillness that fills the room just before a thunderstorm hits? Well, that's what this felt like. I turned my bedside lamp on and looked around, but there was nothing. Just the usual shadows cast by the furniture, and so I figured that I was just on edge from all of the recent stress that I've been through. But the feeling, it didn't go away. The next night, it only got worse too. As I turned off the lights and lay down, I suddenly had this weird urge to look over the edge of the bed. I don't know why. I mean, I'm not a kid anymore or anything. What I mean is that I've long overgrown the fear of monsters under the bed. But that night, something just told me that I had to look. So, hesitantly, I leaned over the edge and glanced underneath. Nothing. Just dust and a lost sock, I think. Relieved, I laughed at myself and turned to lie back down and try and get some sleep. But as I rolled over, I caught something in the mirror across the room. I swear to you that I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was a face. It was barely visible, half in sort of shadow but also half lit by the street lamp outside, pale, unmoving, and staring directly at me from beneath my bed. I jumped up and switched on every light in my room, heart racing. When I looked again, there was nothing there, just dust, and I even got a flashlight, checked every corner, inside the closet, behind the curtains. I mean, I practically tore that room apart. I didn't sleep that night, and the next day I convinced myself that it must have just been a trick of the light. I was exhausted after all, probably just seeing things. I was very wrong though, because every night after that, I would see it. The pale face, always under the bed, always motionless, never blinking, and it never moved while I watched, just stared at me. It became a routine, in fact. I'd lie in bed, feeling its presence. I'd glance under and I would see it there, staring back. Then I'd curl up under the covers and just pray for sleep. I tried telling a friend. She laughed at me, told me that I needed sleep, maybe therapy, and quite honestly, I agreed. But last night, everything changed. I didn't look under the bed that night. I couldn't. I was frozen in fear, in fact. But around 2:17 in the morning, I felt a sudden weight on the mattress, like someone slowly climbing in beside me. Breath hitched in my throat. I didn't dare move. I didn't even blink. Then I felt a warm breath on the back of my neck, and then a whisper, "You finally stopped looking." Well, I shot upright, heart hammering, and started swinging. But the bed, it was empty. I turned on all the lights and nothing. The closet, the bathroom, under the bed, just silence and shadows. But then I noticed something in the mirror. There was no reflection on my bed, just the floor, and underneath it, that same pale face. But this time, I could have sworn that it blinked. 2 years ago in the winter, my husband and I bought and moved to a farm in a small town in Appalachia. It was late October, and in early November the weather had gotten chilly and pretty gloomy. Our stove and oven used propane gas as well as our small gas fireplace, which would allow us to drastically cut down on our power bill. So on a glum November morning, we decided to go down to our local Tractor Supply to buy a propane tank and fill it. As we waited in the checkout line discussing the tank sizes and the prices, a man, in his late 50s I assume, walked intently staring at us. He then turned to a woman's clothing rack that was located by the aisle, rummaging in it a bit, grabbed a woman's flannel, then turned back and stared at us some more, and started walking over in our direction. As I stared back at him and his approach, I noted his clean new-looking clothes and his well-kept facial hair. To my chagrin, he stood behind us in line. But he didn't stand your normal line etiquette distance. He stood very close, in fact. So close that I could feel his breath on my neck. I was extremely uncomfortable having a stranger breathe down my neck like this, but it is a small town, so I figured that everyone is nice, so I turned toward him, smiled, nodded, and said good morning, hoping that the man would feel as uncomfortable as I did, and sort of back up a bit. He didn't. Without even giving me the few seconds that it would take for me to turn around, he started a conversation. Initially, it started with pleasant small talk, based on the conversation that he had overheard between me and my husband. The weather is getting quite cold. This line is taking forever. Telling us about him picking up his great aunt from the airport in like 2 hours, etc. Then quickly going into more intrusive territory. Where are you guys from? Where are you living now? How old are you guys? The latter of the questions I luckily didn't have to answer because it was our turn at the register. For context though, I was in my late 20s and my husband only a few years behind me. Our baby faces could have easily passed for 20 to 21 at the time, though. I politely said, have a good day to the man, and went up to the register. As the guy behind the register started to explain their tank pricing, and filling pricing too, the man just started to flip out. I mean, he started yelling at this poor 17-year-old kid working his weekend job. I can't believe that you guys are charging them so much for a propane tank. To which the clerk responded that the price was market average. They're a young newlywed couple. Why can't you give them a break? At which point I said to the clerk that was not my issue and I would be happy with that price as it was cheaper than most other stores. The man behind us just kept going on though, cussing beneath his breath at the guy behind the counter, and he once again turned to us, and with an instant demeanor switch, and with an eerily syrupy sweet voice said, "Hey, I have a 100-pound tank that I'm not using at my house. I'll let you guys have it for free if you want. You'll just need to come with me to pick it up." My husband thanked him, but kindly declined. He kept pushing. "Are you sure? My house is only 20 minutes from here. You know, I even have another 40-gallon tank that you guys could have too." Again, my husband kindly declined. He continued though, "We have to do it now though because I have to go to the airport and leave town in 2 hours." This was a slip-up that we hadn't noticed until we got home later that day. At this point, I had finished paying and said, "No thanks, we just purchased this one," holding up my receipt and a kind but yet assertive smile, I guess. Getting a bit impatient and annoyed, he hung the random woman's plaid shirt that he had in his hands back on the random rack that he was next to and aggressively stormed out the door. Trying to make the whole situation a bit less tense once the man had left the store, the clerk tried making a crazy old people joke, and we chuckled and we went outside. As we walked over to the outdoor section to get our tank filled up by one of the propane employees, the man from before pulled up into a parking lot spot next to the fill-up area in a pickup truck. The truck was old, but not a beater. probably late 90s, and the bed was filled with junk. Barrels, tarps, boxes, a tent, you name it. He got out though and looked at us and went back at it. "You should really think about getting a second tank, you know. It'll save you a trip and would last you longer." Before I could even interact, he continued, "If y'all don't want to leave your truck here, only one of y'all can just come and ride with me if you want, and the other can meet me at my place." With each y'all, I noticed more and more that the man did not have a typical Southern or Appalachian accent, and the usual warm Southern charm of the word y'all fell sort of flat. I once again replied with, "No thank you, we're good." And then he said something that I will never forget. "Come on, it's a small town. It's safe. I would never hurt such a lovely young couple." At this point, the propane employee came out of the outdoor area and told him to get the heck out of there and to stop bothering us, which I suppose spooked him, because without saying another word, he got into his truck and he drove off. It wasn't until talking to the employee that we all noticed the truck also had no plates on it. We still go to Tractor Supply often and fill up our tank once every couple of months, and while filling up our tank the other day, the same employee was helping us, and he asked us about that day and if we ever saw that guy again. Because apparently, he comes by in the winters when it's quiet and only talks to young couples, which is obviously pretty creepy. Junajet Castle is a 14th century medieval castle with various legends leading to its title of Most Haunted. It is open to visitors, but I believe in order to stay inside the castle overnight, you have to have connections in order to organize access. Well, in May of 2019, myself, my parents, and my friend at the time, we were 16, were given an opportunity to spend the night in this castle during our Poland trip, as my mum's family in Warsaw have some connections to some tour guides. Well, me and my friend being young and impressionable, my mother did not say anything about the castle being haunted prior to our stay, as it would obviously freak us out. We had no idea of the story surrounding the castle or the town. Skipping forward to late that night though, we were inside the bed located in the pillar of the castle and we were fine. Instantaneously though, a negative, or what I can only describe as a heavy energy, kind of anyway, entered the room and was imposed on both of us. It's hard to say without sounding cliche, but it was definitely a feeling of like impending dread. Like, don't look at your surroundings, keep your eyes on the screen sort of dread. We joked that this place must be haunted because we both got goosebumps at this shift of energy. No trigger that caused it, by the way. We both just had chills all of a sudden. What really made us feel uneasy, though, is that we both seemed to feel it at the same time. Fast forward a bit, and we're watching more movies on our laptop. It's pretty late at this point, but while my eyes are on the screen, I just sort of know that something is looking at me. My friend proceeds to point out the spot behind the dresser, close to the entrance, and tells me that she's getting bad vibes and doesn't want to look in that spot. Weird, right? Now, the best description is maybe a shadow or a silhouette or maybe nothing visual at all that is standing in the corner of the room. The thing is, though, is that me and my friend could exactly describe her in the exact same way. A blonde, golden-haired girl, definitely a female presence, and very, very negative or sad or possibly angry energy. We couldn't see anything with our eyes at all, but we knew exactly where she was and what she looked like. I think the most uneasy part, though, was just the feeling of being watched by something that does not want you there. By the time that we kind of acknowledged her presence and what she looked like, me and my friend were on top of each other in bed because we were literally frozen in fear. My parents were in the master bedroom next door, and I could easily shout out something to wake them up, but we couldn't. Me and my friend were huddled together in bed, frozen. We were sort of nervously laughing, but really trying to avoid eye contact with this weird presence in the room. I'm not sure if she was angry at us or maybe just an angry or sad spirit in general, but we ended up just sort of blacking out in the end. We couldn't decipher any intelligible message. It was just kind of an intuition that this young blonde woman was there with us, and suddenly all I remember is everything just going black. Well, the next morning, as you can probably imagine, we packed up and we left pretty quickly. I told my parents about our night and they were pretty uncomfortable. What my mother didn't tell us until later, though, was that the legend of the castle apparently involved some story of a woman who lived there hundreds of years ago being murdered. I was told that she was thrown into the castle well. Other sources, though, say that she was killed in other ways, for which her spirit has never left the castle in order to protect something, or something along those lines anyway. I have found very few sources that go into detail, and I've never really read anyone else's experiences either. But I would love to know a few things from this experience. What are the chances of it being a real claim, being that there were two witnesses of it? Is the translucent figure, orb, or mental image, or telepathy thing sort of common for a human spirit? The story that we had absolutely no clue about, it also seems to weirdly match up with our experience, which means that it's either super coincidental or that there's something more going on in that castle. Also, my parents did not experience anything that night. They fell asleep early and slept soundly through the night pretty much, although the portrait across from their bed apparently kept giving them cheeky looks. It's hard to find any sort of information of substance about this place, so maybe someone who has heard of it before or has any info on it, unlikely as it may be, might be able to help out here and give us at least a little bit more information. So I walked alone down a remote area in Roanoke, VA today, and will never do it again. I've been followed and had random men ask if I want to ride into crowded cities or whatever, but that happens like twice a month max. I went on a 9-minute short walk with my dog this day though, and I had 3 separate men offer me rides. I had men wave at me from their cars, and I was also chased by a homeless man. I was terrified, and the few tiny shops that I ran past were closed for Sunday. I was literally the only person that I saw walking during my entire walk. This homeless man, though, he spotted me in the distance and started yelling, "Hey, hey, come here," over at me. I ignored him and I just kept walking, though. He stood up, picked up his bag, and started jogging after me. I picked up my dog and I started running. The man started to run faster too. I ran behind an old house, literally looked abandoned, and I hid there. Then I just ran into the forest area and I ran around until I found some civilization, a remote gas station. All these remote areas look like the set of a horror movie or a playground for serial killers, to be honest. If I did in fact run into someone in this wooded area, they could easily murder me and no one would probably ever know. I mean, there were literally 0 people around, 0 cameras, pretty creepy abandoned homes and greenery as far as the eye could see. That's why I was so freaked out when this happened. If this man had caught me, we would be completely isolated together. And quite honestly, I have no idea why he was chasing me like that. Additionally, one of the guys who offered me a ride literally turned his car around and drove the opposite direction when I said no. So it was like he followed me just to ask or something. He was actually quite young and handsome too, so another girl might have even trusted him and gone with him. The other men who offered me rides and the homeless man were all significantly older than me, though. I have no idea what any of this was about, to be honest, but really, the amount of men that offered me a ride, and then the homeless man chasing me like that, I just cannot help but feel like there was something orchestrated going on. Anyway, I'm just shocked at how frequently solo men offered me rides, and as a solo young woman walking on the side of the road like that, maybe I'm being cynical, but I really don't think that it was just to be helpful. So this happened way back when I was a teen, and so the memories may be a little bit fuzzy. Basically, my family used to own a dog, and one night I took the said dog out to the backyard to let him run around and do his stuff. I went back inside and was going to let him back in soon, but then my brother and I heard him barking a lot. He usually barks like crazy for no reason, to be honest, so we were not overly worried about it. A minute later or so, I went back out to bring him back in. Usually my dog would not go in willingly either. I would have to go outside and yell his name a couple of times, and I was doing this. And it was this time that my brother suddenly started screaming my name from his window. So essentially, he was screaming at me to come back inside. I did this without question. I'd never heard him sound so worried before, in fact. I went to our room and asked him what was wrong. He replied with something that honestly chilled me to the bone, too. He said that he had seen someone standing almost directly behind me while I was in the backyard. And it was then that I remembered that I had accidentally left the back door open. So we got our mum, got a bat, and we went to the back door. We got our dog back inside and glanced around the backyard. Our shed door was wide open, which was unusual since we never used it. And earlier, my brother said that he saw a light in it as well, so what I believe happened was someone broke into our shed, when I took my dog out, that is, and at some point they must have heard the activity, and so they must have tried to leave or whatever. Also, a little while before this too, my brother swore up and down that he saw a man go into our backyard as well. I don't know if that was the same person or not, but it's certainly possible, right? I've never had something like this happen to me before, and so I thought that I would share it because, honestly, when you go through something like this, with some random stranger just sort of appearing in your personal space like that, it is something that is pretty terrifying. Somebody shared a story on here about security, and for some reason it reminded me of a really weird occurrence that took place when I was in college. I thought that you guys all might get a kick out of it, so I thought that I would share it here. So when I was 20 years old, I'm female, I subleased a friend's place for the summer. It was one of those houses built for college students, in a subdivision that's all college students really. The house had 4 bedrooms. I rented 1 bedroom, but the other roommates were out of town for the summer as well, so I was alone. Coincidentally, one of my friends had a younger sibling that needed to find a home for her rescue pit for the summer. I've had boxers all my life and always loved pit bulls. I'd always been curious about getting one as well. And to this day, I am so glad that I had that dog, because I swear that she saved me, possibly my life even. Now, I'm obsessive about 2 things because of who I am as a person: cleaning and locking the doors and setting the alarms when I leave or I'm alone, which meant that I was locking and setting the alarm a lot that summer because I was alone. The first night that I had the pit bull, her name was June by the way, I was a little bit nervous if I'm being honest. I didn't know until my friend dropped the dog off, but my friend's siblings had just rescued this pit, like less than a month ago. Clearly I should have asked more questions, but anyway, I was nervous because this dog was a bit apprehensive about me and fresh out of the shelter or rescue, wherever my friend's siblings found her. This was clear by the way that she interacted with me and the home surroundings and all that. It was clear that June had been abused. This dog unfortunately had scars all over her body, and by the looks of it, had recently, semi-recently even, given birth. Also worth noting too is that June was hulked out. This dog was absolutely jacked. Now, I'd rehabbed a dog before, so I felt like I was up to the challenge. After all, I had the entire summer and it was just June and I. Note too that this house had those sort of magnetic fob locks, a door at the front of the house which faced the rest of the houses in the neighborhood. There was also a door at the back of the house which faced a sort of alley where I parked my car. I locked any door any time that I used it, as well as the door to the bedroom whenever I went to sleep. I had June in the bedroom with me. There was an alarm on the house, but the girls that actually lived there, remember I was subleasing, never really set it up and just didn't have the desire to do so either, which meant that I was relying on the locks. So, night 1. I get into bed, direct June to get comfy, plush bed that I'd put together for her, laid her toys in it, super soft blankets, the works. And I guess that June decided no, because the next thing that I knew was that she was in the bed with me, facing me with her head and all those teeth, a few inches from mine even. I barely slept because I was a bit scared that I'd accidentally roll onto her foot or something, scare her and end up with my face eaten off. Yes, I know it's silly, but this is what's going through my mind as I laid awake, staring at this massive, absolutely unit of a dog. The second night, it was the same thing, except I fell asleep that night. I woke up the next morning to June staring directly into my soul. I guess we're bonding. Night 3, we spent the evening watching movies, snuggling. I shared my pizza crust, and she was definitely feeling the love because she finally let me scratch her belly and started to act like a puppy, and less like the recently released inmate. The morning after night 3, I wake up and it's really early in the morning, as in it's like 6:30 or 7 o'clock. I usually got up at around 9 in the morning for my class at noon, but as I'm coming out of the sleepy stupor that I was in, trying to get my bearing and understand why the heck I'm awake so early, I accidentally clocked June. But June is absolutely snarling at the bedroom door, body slamming the door, sniffing while snarling the base of the door, lunging over and over at the handle of the door. It was absolutely terrifying, but I wasn't afraid of her, because I quickly realized that something or someone was right outside of my bedroom door and jiggling the door handle, which I'd locked at this stage. I do live in Texas, so I grabbed my 12 gauge that I kept under my bed and racked it. It's very old and it's a very loud gun, but when I racked the gun, everything became very quiet all of a sudden. I say, "Who's there?" Maintenance. We're maintenance. We didn't mean to scare you. We're just here to fix the dishwasher." I didn't put in any maintenance request. And the dishwasher, it's in the kitchen on the first floor. Yeah, we were told no one was here. I'm training a new guy and I thought that I'd show him what most of the houses look like inside. At this point, June is losing her ever-loving mind, and I'm armed, kind of annoyed that these idiots have woken me up so early. Then it dawns on me. I had deadbolted the doors. Maybe the maintenance people had some way to bypass the deadbolts? I honestly don't know, but this was time when the magnetic fobs were kind of new, I guess, or new to the apartments near campus anyways. I should have been more scared, I know, but I could tell that these guys were terrified now, between hearing the monster on the other side of the door and my gun racking. So I cracked the door a smidge, just enough for them to see the gun, June foaming at the mouth, and so that I could also get a good look at their uniform, to confirm whether they were actually real servicemen or not. Weirdly enough, they didn't have any uniforms. There were 3 men. 2 men looked like they had it rough, and they were maybe in their early 40s, and the other guy was in his mid-20s. All 3 of the men looked really dirty, like they'd been sleeping outside maybe. Weirdly though, the clothes appeared clean, but They had not been showered in a hot minute, that much was clear. I tell them to leave or that I'd open the door and let June out. I tell them that I'll call the front office and clear this up, but for now that they needed to leave. And sure enough, all three men turned around and they got out of that house quickly. Once the men left, I checked the doors and the back door was unlocked. I definitely had checked it the night before and there was no chance that I'd forgotten it. I called the front office the minute that it was open at 8 a.m., to which they said that they had not dispatched any maintenance men that day and asked me for a description of the men. I'm not sure if they were ever caught, but I certainly do hope so. I have never been so scared in my life. I'd used my gun when hunting, but never once pointed it at a person. In that specific housing complex, at least 5 women were attacked in weeks before this encounter too, so I was definitely on edge. I kept June the entire summer, and I would have tried to have adopted her, as we definitely bonded, and I knew that she had my back at this stage. I felt really safe with her, in fact. But the place that I was moving into, unfortunately, wasn't a place that she would be happy, as it didn't have a yard and it was really small too. But to this day, I am convinced that June, she saved me from something truly horrible. I grew up on a ranch or farm, which kind of means that I worked there too, if you know anything about family farms. Some background on that is that my family has the farm, the land that all comes with it, and because of how farms were settled back in the day, that would usually mean that when you buy the land that a house comes with it. My family uses these houses for providing housing for employees as one of the benefits, and since I'm in my early 20s and was still working there at the time, I moved into one of the older houses to be on my own. When I say older as well, I mean an older house. The kind that's made of concrete bricks and has been on that land long enough that no one can tell you who originally lived there. It was there when my grandma was young, in fact, and would work for the people who owned it at the time, milking cows and bottle-raising heifers. I have asked her if anyone had passed there, and she said that she had never heard of anything like that happening. However, the house has been in my family long enough that multiple cousins and uncles or relatives have lived there, and more than one of them have claimed it's haunted, although that had never been mentioned to me prior to living there. Anyway, I'm really not sure what to make of this story that I'm about to tell, but I would like others' thoughts and opinions on it. So I moved in, and for a while everything was good and well, really. I had my dog with me and was enjoying being on my own for a good while when, eventually, one night a loud, thump came from the basement. When I say loud bump, though, it kind of sounded more like the whoosh of a fire being put out really quickly, but also heavier than that. Like a little bit deeper, and as if a whooshing noise had weight to it almost. Like whatever had made the noise was really heavy. It was loud enough, though, that the house vibrated a little bit, and it made my dog wake up from their nap and cock their head trying to figure out what that was, and also had me sit up from the couch and look at the vents because they all led to the basement. Since the noise came up easily through those vents, I was worried that there may be something wrong with my heater or whatever, so I got up and went to the basement to make sure that nothing was wrong with it. I couldn't see anything wrong, making it itself immediately apparent, so I just figured that it was the quirk of an old house. But this noise began to happen on a regular basis, and every time that I went to look if something had fallen or the heater shut off or something like that, I could just never find anything wrong. Eventually, I just began to ignore it, and I got used to it. My buddy came over a few times, and the first time that they heard the noise late at night, it made him jump in his chair and get wide-eyed, asking me what the heck that was. I just replied with, I don't know. It started happening a while ago, and I cannot figure out what it was or how to make it stop, and nothing's wrong downstairs, so I just ignore it. he made a joke about my house being haunted and we laughed about it. The noise continued, but I thought really nothing of it because it wasn't really affecting me or anything. However, eventually I began seeing, shadows darting past the doorway into my kitchen out of the corner of my eye at night while I was on my couch watching TV. They were quick too, but honestly it looked like they were shadows just trying to almost stay out of my line of vision, and in the kitchen and the bathroom and my entryway where I had all the lights shut off, so the only light in the house would be the TV at the time. They were always low to the ground, and at first, if I caught a motion out of the corner of my eye, I would snap my head in that direction to see if some mice or something like that had gotten into my house, but I never got a good look, direct look anyway, at anything, and there weren't ever any mouse droppings left anywhere or anything. I wasn't seeing them super often anyway, but it was frequent enough to where I got used to this too, and I wouldn't get freaked out or whip my head in that direction trying to see anything. I just figured that maybe with how dark it got in my house that my mind wanted to play tricks out of the corner of my vision, I guess. I don't know, but throughout all of this, some other small things began to happen that would give me a flicker of a pause. But again, I never really put too much thought into them because I was either too tired from farm life or about to be late to farm life. But small things like waking up to my door being opened a little bit when I could have sworn that I left it closed the night before. This happened more than once too, a few times in fact. It got to the point where I made a point of making sure that I closed my door all the way, but in the morning I'd either second guess myself or I would forget to check, but the times that it did happen and I noticed, I remember that I had closed that door. But I'm a guy, so finer details do slip past my mind here or there, especially when I'm focused on tasks for the day. Anyway, I'm not too sure how to start this next portion of what happened, but I remember at some point that the energy in my house became just unpleasant, I guess is the best way to express it. The noise from the basement got louder, and I would be a little bit on edge when moving through my house with the lights off, even though I'm not really afraid of the dark or anything. In fact, I prefer it to having a whole bunch of lights on. But one night, I had gone to bed in my room where it was pitch black. I had some trouble falling asleep, although that wasn't particularly out of the ordinary. I mean, I've always had trouble with sleeping, really. However, I have never had sleep paralysis before this night, and never again since then. I was woken up by the noise of something in the night from the vent that was right next to my bed, but it was loud. I opened my eyes, but I couldn't move. I was on my back with my head slightly turned to the left, so I couldn't really see about 2/3 of my room. The door was slightly open, and a little bit of light from the living room was coming in. For some reason, too, before I even woke up really, my heart was absolutely pounding. So hard that I could hear and feel the blood being pushed through my head. I was in a panic right away, but I couldn't really do anything. I felt suddenly like something terrible was there, in the small room with me. I was freaking out and trying to get any part of my body to move that I could, and eventually I started to get my forearm to lift up, bending my arm at the elbow. It moved extremely slowly from the bed though, but that's all that I was working on. I couldn't even close or open my hand at the time. Once my arm reached about 90 degrees though, it was like breaking through a wall almost, and I was in full control again. I shot straight up, looking around and breathing heavy, and I saw nothing in my room, and my heart rate started to slow again. It was almost like having a panic attack. That also took away my ability to use my own body, but in my sleep almost. I got up and I went out into the living room and turned on the TV and tried to sleep on the couch for that night, but I didn't get much rest. I was too freaked out. Since then, I have moved out of that house, and really nothing like that has ever happened since then. So I'm just not really sure what happened. After this, I asked my grandma about the history of the house as far as spirits or people passing there, and she said that she never heard of anyone passing there, but that a lot of people that lived in that house had claimed that it was haunted. If you've got any ideas on what was going on or similar experiences to this, then I would genuinely love to hear them. So I was a young mother and pregnant with my last child when my ex-husband and I found a cute little rental house. It had light blue siding, a large wraparound porch, white shuttered windows, a large backyard, and a separate 2-car garage. It was a 3-bedroom and a 1-bathroom. It was on a dead-end road with 4 other houses with lots between each and a large cotton field at the end of the cul-de-sac. Across the street was an old Baptist church. Now, when we had viewed the home, I noticed that all of the cabinets were opened when we arrived, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. My favorite part of the house was the room that I made the nursery. It had the most light, and it had 2 windows with a large closet. It was an old enough home that it didn't have any central air at the time. We had window units, of which one was in each bedroom. The thing about the nursery, though, was that it seemed bright looking into it, but when you walked in, it also felt really dark. It's hard to describe, but when we viewed it, I didn't think much of it. I think that I assumed that some cloud cover came over when I walked in or whatever. Many events occurred in our home, too many to talk about in one story like this, but we lived there for 3 years, and I'll focus on the one major event and a couple of others that triggered the decision to finally move, one of which nearly killed my entire family. The nursery had been the focus of most of the activity. However, we experienced activity in all parts of the house. The nursery eventually was shut and locked in the end. It became effectively the graveyard for all of the toys that the batteries had been removed from, but the toys would still go off on their own sometimes. Now, one night, my ex-husband and I were in our bedroom getting ready for bed. Our children were asleep in the room that they shared on the other side of the house. Our room was next to the nursery with the living room, kitchen, and the bathroom between us. My mother was in the living room playing on the computer at the time. My husband reached up to turn off the bedroom light at the fan rather than the light switch in order to leave the fan going on. He was on his knees on the bed and he reached up and we heard a loud growl and a snarl from the foot of the bed. It sounded like it was snapping at his foot hanging off the bed. He jerked his foot up and we both looked, but there was nothing there. Our dog was asleep at my mother's feet at the time in the living room as well. I suddenly felt like someone was holding a lighter to the back of my leg and I couldn't get my bottoms off fast enough, and on the back of my leg there were 3 long angry red marks that began to blister in front of our eyes. I went to the doctor later thinking maybe shingles, but no. He said that it was a burn, but we couldn't figure out how that was even caused. He prescribed silver sulfidine in the end. My mother ended up moving out because of the activity. My ex-husband, he was a musician at the time, but one night he was gone on the road and I woke up to my mother crawling in bed with me, terrified. I had never seen my mother scared like that or ever again since then, but she whispered urgently, trying to wake me. I woke confused. "What's wrong, Mum?" "The children, they're crying in the nursery," she whispered shakily. I got up groggy and confused. The nursery had been closed off for some time. The kids wouldn't have been sleeping in there. "What?" I said as I made my way to go out of the bedroom. My mother grabbed my arm, pulling me down to her. "No," she said. "Our babies are in our beds and I checked." I stood there staring at her, perplexed. But then I heard it too. I could hear children crying. I slowly made my way down the hall to the closed nursery as the sound got louder. The dog was going nuts in the backyard too. I reached up and turned the doorknob and took a deep breath. I quickly swung the door open and the sound stopped. But the room was ice cold. I stood there staring around the room confused when suddenly it started again. But this time it sounded like it was coming from outside of the bedroom windows. I rushed out thinking that maybe I was being pranked, and when I got out there I could still hear it, but it was coming from the nursery inside the house again. I shut the nursery back off, and my mother and I sat up in the living room with the dog until the sun rose that day. This is when the sound finally stopped as well. I felt like I had to stand guard over my children from that point on, and that was really nerve-wracking. I spent many nights like this too. I mean, how do you protect your children from something like this? At one point, I took a second shift job mixing IVs at the hospital in order to be awake while my family slept. I would get home around the time the activity was known to occur during the night. I would get home from work and sit up in the living room standing guard over my sleeping family. Another reason too was I was sleepwalking often. One of those episodes was one night when I woke up to a police officer pulling me over. Yeah, that's right. No drugs involved or anything. I woke up to a police officer pulling me over and I was really confused. I didn't even know how I'd gotten there, and my last memory was of going to bed. When he came to my window, he could see that I was really alarmed. I lied and told him that I was going to the store to get some medicine for my babies. But then it hit me. My kids were alone in that house. The officer followed me home to make sure that I was okay. He had dealt with coming to my house before, and the police knew that it had weird things going on. Officers had come to my home and experienced things even. They were called when we had first moved in and thought that there was an intruder at one stage. I woke up another night with my ex-husband yelling at me. We were in the middle of the kitchen and I was mad that he had woke me, and we argued for a minute because he had said that I had woke up the kids staring out of their bedroom window, telling them to get out and to get out of the house. I argued that I hadn't done any such thing. I kept demanding to know why he had woken me up when I saw my children standing there looking terrified. That's when I realized that when he woke me, I wasn't in bed. I was standing in the kitchen. I was scared to sleep at night, afraid that it would happen again. I avoided sleeping at night as often as I could. I tried sleeping during the day, but there were just some nights that I had to sleep. And on one of those nights, I woke up to my ex-husband standing at the foot of the bed with his back to me. I could see him because of the screensaver from the computer screen in front of him. The alarm clock sat next to the computer and it read 3 a.m. I sat up in bed. I called out to him, but he never turned around. Suddenly, though, I felt like I was falling down really fast. My stomach was flipping and the room was ice cold. I looked to his side of the bed and it was empty. I looked back and he was now gone. Then the covers started to be pulled down off of me. I grabbed them, trying to hold on to them. Then the banging started on the walls and I instantly froze. Then the blinds started flipping open and shutting in time with it. Then the window AC started beeping from low, medium to high in time with it. And then there was this god-awful smell. I couldn't move, I was frozen in terror. The covers were violently jerked out of my hands off of the bed. I finally took in air and I started screaming. I was a grown woman, but I was screaming for my mother at that stage. I got the courage to reach for the doorknob and I turned it, and my ex-husband was opening it. He had been violently ill in the bathroom and he could hear the banging in the window unit, but it stopped when he opened the door. That next morning, I woke up with the worst headache. I woke my ex-husband asking him to get my migraine medicine for me from the bathroom. He got up and took 2 steps and just collapsed. I got up and came around the bed and he was lying on the floor. He looked up at me and said, "Get the kids out, something is wrong." My body felt so heavy. I moved very slowly towards the kids' room. I found my 5-year-old son in the kitchen face down, and that's when I passed out. I woke to my ex-husband telling me to get up and to get our son out. He was going for our daughter, apparently. I got my son awake and got him outside into the front yard. He laid down and I went back in. My ex-husband had passed out outside of the kids' room and I could barely move at this stage. It took too much energy to try and lean down, so I nudged him with my foot until he finally woke up. I told him to crawl outside with our son and I was getting our daughter. Now, this part is hard for me to remember, but I found her tiny little body cold and blue. She only weighed about 30 pounds and she was 3, and I dragged her out of the house and she felt like she weighed a ton. I laid my little girl on the front porch, and it's hard to describe what it feels like when your brain is lacking oxygen like this. It's very difficult to think, but your body is prioritizing survival, so thinking, let alone hallucinating, just isn't even possible. The brain just isn't even trying to make sense of information at all. It's computing very little, really. It's prioritizing trying to keep your body going, but even through that haze, I knew that my daughter was now dead. So I went back into the house to get my cell phone, to call for some help, and lay down inside to die with my child. I couldn't stay conscious long enough to complete the call, so I went back to the front door to make the call, and when I got there, my little girl's eyes are open and she was breathing. She had a vacant stare, but she was alive. So I came outside and I made the call, and that's when I passed out next to my daughter. I woke to emergency responders there. A fireman came out of my home wearing a mask with a tank on his back. He showed another firefighter a device. The firefighter could hardly believe what he was seeing. Lethal levels of carbon monoxide is 30 per square foot. It was over 500 in my own home. We were quickly rushed to the hospital, and the levels immediately dropped after we left the property, even before they started trying to air it out. My middle child said that he had been woken by a child who told him to get up and go out and to go to the kitchen to turn off the burner, because it was on but not lit. He hadn't turned it on, and neither had anyone else, and I hadn't even cooked that weekend. He evidently had passed out in the kitchen after turning it off. My daughter said that she remembers playing with a black cat and then describing the same child along with the cat watching me drag her body out, and then they took her to her body and showed her how to get back into it. The investigator knew this after interviewing my kids, and he said that he still couldn't explain those levels, and he found nothing malfunctioning in the end. So we were not hallucinating for like the 3 years as people like to speculate, but he just couldn't explain it. In fact, it was listed as an unsolved case in the end. Plus, that doesn't really explain how my children saw the same child. I'm sharing this because I want to set the record straight too. Police that experienced events were not hallucinating from carbon monoxide if they could hear the bangs and the screams before even entering the house. Carbon monoxide didn't cause the lights to flicker. It didn't cause the electrical devices to go on and off in our room. It didn't burn me, and it didn't open all the cabinets in the kitchen every day. It didn't turn water on by itself, and it didn't open the fridge and didn't jerk the contents out. It also didn't make toys go off without batteries. It didn't make the walls cry in the nursery, and yes, I said cry. The walls started dripping a sort of clear fluid, and again, when you're lacking oxygen to that degree, you cannot think, let alone hallucinate. I experienced it, and I'm not crazy, and nor is every single person that ever came to my home. I mean, it even reached the point where the police were hesitant to come into the home in the end. Obviously, we moved after that. The last night there, I was cleaning alone as well. All the furniture was gone, and someone knocked at the door. I looked out of the peephole and saw my neighbor standing there. Headlights came up behind him, and he turned around. I opened the door, and when I did, there was no one there and no car. I shut the door, and suddenly it felt like a truck had slammed into me. I couldn't breathe. I was rushing back up to the bedroom to try and get my inhaler in my purse, and that was the last thing that I remember. I woke falling from a standing position in the living room, slamming into the wall. I was so cold. In fact, I've never been that cold. I was disoriented because the furniture was gone, and I made my way to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror, and my teeth were chattering, and I was so pale. I stripped down and I ran a hot bath, climbing in. I was just so desperate to get warm. When I had undressed, my phone fell out of my bra, and I grabbed it and called my ex-husband, crying. I told him that I was at the Blue House and I just woke up freezing. He was frantic. I had been missing for 5 hours now, apparently. They had been to the Blue House looking for me, and apparently I wasn't there. I don't know where I was or what I was doing, but again, no drugs involved, and the fire inspector already verified no leaks or nothing malfunctioning or anything. After moving, I was in the living room that had a vaulted ceiling with a loft and a bedroom that overlooked it. The kids were playing upstairs, and my ex-husband was in our bedroom, and I was watching TV. When all of a sudden there was a sort of feeling of static building up in the room. I froze, and then you could literally hear this energy rush up to the ceiling. I put my foot down to run, and then it slammed to the floor with like a thunder. The front glass storm door blew outward into the yard, setting off the car alarm. The activity had started again. One day the kids were at school, except for my youngest, who was upstairs. My husband was at work, and I was in the living room painting and watching some TV. My daughter was chattering away upstairs as she was playing, and then she sounded angry and yelled at me to tell him that it was her toy. I sort of absent-mindedly yelled up at her imaginary friend to give her the toy. I assumed that she was playing make-believe, but then she started absolutely screaming. I put my paintbrush down and started up the stairs. I got to the landing and turned toward her room. My daughter had a hold of her doll's feet with both hands, and her body was straight up at a 45-degree angle, pulling. Something had a hold of the doll's hair at the other end, and it was pulling it. Upon seeing this, I literally gasped. My daughter let go when she heard me and dropped to the floor. I grabbed her and loaded her up in the car and left. I don't even think my feet touched the ground. I was running so fast. I picked up my boys, and after that, we never went back. One of my sons, unfortunately, took his own life shortly after this, and I will always wonder if it had something to do with what tormented us. His name was Shane, and he was 17. He had messy brown hair and a crooked little smile. He was growing his first mustache. It was thin, but he was adorable. He was here, and now I was shattered. It was then that I went on a journey of true self-destruction too. I got into drugs and caused a great deal of damage. I make no excuses for that too. The light had left my world, and I just didn't know how to live without this light in this world anymore. I was weak. I declared war on God. I was angry. My other children lost their mum and their brother, and I was selfish. I was lost in my own despair and so focused on my own pain that I didn't even have a mother. And genuinely, this is the greatest regret of my life. I tell you all of this though because After my show aired on the Travel Channel, people were unkind about it. Some people made fun of me because at this point I was on drugs, and it's obvious when you see me. I'm very thin, and they assumed that I had been on drugs while in the house and it was all drug-induced, but I can assure you that it wasn't. I was a nurse first, and I then went into pharmacy work. I was the director of a nationwide pharmacy when my son died. The drugs didn't start until after his death. I often see people trying to dismiss people's experiences as carbon monoxide poisoning. Really, people need to stop doing that. My story is honestly where people seem to get this idea from too. Carbon monoxide didn't follow us to all those homes. It didn't cause everyone who came there to hallucinate from outside of the home, and it certainly didn't blow out that glass door either. As I said too, when you lack oxygen like that, it isn't going to go unnoticed. You're going to know that something is wrong, and you aren't going to have a leak in the home and be hallucinating for years without even knowing that there's a leak. You can tell something is wrong pretty quickly, and you just cannot think. You can barely move, in fact. Carbon monoxide bonds to oxygen, displacing hemoglobin and starving the tissue of oxygen, and you can feel it. Your body even struggles to move. I see a lot of people discrediting other people's experiences. The fact of the matter is, though, is that if you weren't there, then you just don't know. You cannot disprove it unless you were there too, and I cannot tell you how isolating it is for people to do this to you. You're looking for answers, genuine ones, and even some genuine help, and people just try to make you feel crazy or stupid. I wish people would quit using the events that occurred in my home to discredit others. You are wrong, and you really just do not know what you're talking about. So I'm female, and at the time of this story I was 9 years old. My parents used to work as a night market vendor, and they were selling shoes back then. My mum did warn me to stay cautious and not to wander off too far, especially at night. I listened for the most part, as I've always felt like a bit of an anxious kid. I always had this feeling of just being in constant danger, I guess. But one night I was playing beside my parents' van. My parents were attending the customers, so they didn't have their attention on me, and as I was playing, acting as if I'm a Pokemon trainer, I saw a glimpse of a man. The man was tall and skinny. He was hiding behind an abandoned burger stall just a few meters away from me. I kept myself on high alert while playing. The man slowly emerged from the shadows and showed me an RM1 on his hand. He beckoned with his hand, inviting me to come closer. I knew from the start that this is something my mum had always warned me about. Man in the shadows, luring kids to come closer. It all made sense to me, so I backed away, trying to keep myself closer to the light and in the eye of the crowd. The man crept in closer, raising his hand for me to come and see the cash in his hand. He then put the money on the table and he stepped away. Again, it was clear that he wanted me to come and get it. From then on, I already felt super unsafe, so I turned around and played quite literally in front of my parents' vendor. I picked up a hammer and gently swished it around, thinking that the man would think that I was dangerous. I thought that I was safe, but the man was persistent. He blended in with the crowd, now with a much bigger wad of cash in his hand. He stood far away, a strategic spot where he would run away without being seen, I supposed. That's when I had had enough, and I was 100% creeped out. I ran to my mum and I told her that I didn't feel well. She asked me to stay in our van if that was the case, so I got in. I kept looking through the window for a whole minute, but the man was now nowhere to be found, so I thought that he was gone. With a sigh of relief, I lay in my van telling myself that I should probably get some sleep. And that was when I saw the head of a familiar haircut walking in front of the van window to the other door. a door that I knew was unlocked. I immediately got out of the van and I ran to my mum. I told her that there was a man with money telling me to come closer. My mum asked me to show my dad where the man with the money is. My dad followed me, but by that time the man had disappeared, leaving the money on the top of the same table. I pointed the money to my dad and he approached the table and took the money and gave it to me, and he told me to stay in his sight that night. That was the last time that I ever saw that man, and it's always made me question just how many other victims he had. Had he been caught yet? Is he in jail now? I don't know, but I sure don't like to think about it either. This happened to me in middle school. So I found this old antique vintage clock in pretty good condition. It was a wooden clock and it was pretty small, but it would chime 3 times to signal the new start of every hour. So I asked my parents if I could bring it upstairs and use it. They agreed, and I also asked who did it belong to because it looked really nice and not my parents' style of furniture by any means. They told me that they didn't know and that I could use it, basically just brushing me off. So I put it in my room, and I have a bunk bed with my brother, and he sleeps on the top and I sleep on the bottom. I put the clock next to me by my head above me on the rail, and for months nothing really happened with that clock. In fact, I actually really loved it because of the song that it played with 3 chimes. But one night I had a terrible nightmare. I was sleeping and suddenly I felt this pressure on me. I realized quickly that this was sleep paralysis, a dream, but I felt really bad energy, and it was coming from my room door, which was fully closed, and I watched this door slowly open. At this point, I'm screaming for my dad because my parents' room was right next to mine, and I knew that he would be up because he gets up early to go to the gym. But as soon as I scream, my voice is completely hoarse, like there's no sound and I'm coughing and trying to scream for my dad. I wake up because my dad woke me up. He asked if I was okay, and I was like, yeah, why? Because I was still out of it from my dream and all that, and he was like, okay, I'm just making sure. I remember watching him leave my room and I fall asleep pretty much instantly. The dream continued, except the door was almost halfway open, so I'm screaming again, asking for my dad to help me, to come back and that it's here. I'm freaking out because this pressure is back on me and I'm seeing the door almost fully open now and I'm shaking. Now, for me, when I have sleep paralysis dreams, what works is when I start moving my head too much and I wake up, so I'm doing exactly that. Then I hear it right next to me. My clock starts chiming, but over the chiming sound, I hear this little girl's voice mocking me, saying "Daddy" every time that it chimed in a sort of mocking way. It's whispering, and again it was so close, and when I woke up, I was on my side facing the wall, and I felt that evil presence on the other side of my bed. I was too scared to turn around or to go to sleep, even to cover myself with the blanket. I just stared at the wall. I ended up asking my dad if he saw anything weird or did anything weird, and he told me that nothing happened. So I'm at my family's party and we're sharing ghost stories at one stage, and I'm telling my cousin my dream, and they stopped me halfway through. They told me that they had heard this story from my dad allegedly, and I was confused because I was like, what? And they proceeded to tell me that night my dad allegedly woke me up screaming in my room. When he entered my room, I was screaming and choking allegedly. So he shook me awake, and then he told my cousins that he had never heard me or anyone in the house scream like that. I instantly felt fear because my parents had always gaslit me into thinking that any paranormal experience that I had was not real and I just have an overactive imagination, but hearing this confirmed that I wasn't overreacting. After that, I turned off the clock and I put it back in the basement. I did come back 5 years later to see that maybe they sold it, but My dad had allegedly thrown that clock away for some reason. I really hated that house after I moved out. I never experienced anything paranormal anywhere else, but me and my brother can agree that there's a demon or a little girl or something in that basement, because there's been multiple instances where we've seen this little girl in the house, and every single time it is a very, very dark experience. I live in a pretty average apartment complex, nothing fancy, 3 floors and kind of quiet. I've been here a little over a year now though, and most people keep to themselves really. Say hi in the hall, take out the trash, really that's about it. But a few weeks ago, this new guy moved into the unit across from mine, early 30s maybe, thin buzz cut, always wearing the same grey hoodie, even when it's hot out. Didn't really think too much of him at first. I mean, people come and go here all the time. He leaves his door open sometimes though. Not like open, but sort of cracked open. Just enough to see the light on the inside. Never any noise, no TV, no talking. I've never seen anyone go out or in except for him. One time though, I was taking the trash out at around 1 in the morning, and he was just sort of standing in the hallway, not doing anything. No phone, and just standing by his door, staring at the floor like he was waiting for something. I ended up saying hey, and he didn't even flinch, just kept standing there like I wasn't even there. I walked past him, and honestly, I felt my skin crawl, like when you know that somebody is watching you. Fast forward to last night though, I woke up at around 3 in the morning because I heard this sort of soft knocking noise. Not loud, just a few taps spaced out. I thought it was my door, but when I looked through the peephole, nobody was there. I stood there for a second, and right as I started to turn away, I heard it again. This time it sounded like it was coming from inside the hallway, just slow, spaced out knocks, like somebody testing how quiet they could be. I opened the door and looked out. Nothing. But his door was open again, a little wider than usual in fact. I couldn't see anything inside, just darkness though. I didn't get any closer. I closed my door, locking everything, sat in my living room with the lights on like an idiot for an hour before going back to bed. He didn't leave his apartment at all today, and I know this because I stayed home from work just to see it. No movement, no sound, just the door, shut tight now. And look, maybe I'm being paranoid, but something about him just feels wrong. Almost like he's pretending to be normal, but doesn't actually know how. I don't know. Should I say something to management? The cops? I feel sort of dumb about it, but I've just got this feeling in my chest that just will not go away. So me and my younger brother were visiting my mum for this most recent Memorial Day. Her home is 2 stories in a nice suburban area. She lives with her boyfriend and his daughter and son, plus my baby brother. I have 2 brothers. Everyone's bedroom is on the 2nd floor, except for my stepsister's. For this trip, my brother had an air mattress in my baby brother's room, and I slept downstairs on a couch in the living room, as we have done many times before. The weekend was super fun too, relaxed, and every night I slept peacefully and comfortably. Well, all except for the last one. It was around 1 in the morning. My mother had finished showing me the first 2 episodes of Yellow Jackets, which she is obsessed with, and that's factor 1. That show is creepy as heck, but by no means is it the worst that I've ever seen. Factor 2 is that I had also smoked some green about 3 hours prior. Also relevant, but I want to convey that I'm no stranger to smoking and know when it has worn off and all that. I was definitely sober is what I'm getting at by the time that we all headed to bed, but I want to cover all the facts because it's relevant. So, everyone except for me went upstairs. My stepsister was already in bed and had been asleep for a while. I showered, packed my stuff because we were leaving the next morning, and laid down on the couch to scroll on Pinterest and get sleepy. And it was right about here is where I began to feel this off feeling. The room felt emptier, like there was way more space, like something was missing and I just couldn't put my finger on it. It's not silent. There's fish, turtle tanks with active pumps in the room, and also a fan sitting on the coffee table behind my head, pointing over me and pushing air away from me. It's also not dark either. Some reptile lights in the room have night mode and all that. The living room is also the reptile room, but my point is that it's not creepy and I'm not all alone, and this was the first time that I had felt anything like this in this room or in the house in general. A reminder too that I had slept just fine the 3 previous nights. Anyway, I'm laying there scrolling on my phone, ignoring the off feeling, when suddenly I hear 3 distinct loud clicks come from the entrance of the hallway leading to the garage. The best way that I can describe it is that the clicks sounded like someone making when they're trying to sort of coax a cat to come to them. I sort of froze, fully expecting my sister to walk out of the hallway leading, as it also leads to her room, but nothing happens. I then start running down my options. What could have made that sound? A faulty light? There was no flickering. Maybe an animal? None of the reptiles' presents have that kind of capability. My sister? Maybe, but what the heck is she doing? Why didn't I hear her door? And she's been sleeping for hours, and she's a heavy sleeper. A machine? Maybe, but which one? It had never made that noise before. I want to stress that it sounded like a person clicking their tongue though, not gears or electricity or anything, or even anything dropping because I looked. Context though on myself in this house is that I do believe in the paranormal, or more so spiritual stuff. It's cheesy, I know, to say that I ran through all the options first before saying something is paranormal, but I really did this. I'm a huge skeptic though because I want to find real proof. That is, until it actually happens to me. I now have 2 encounters that I can't explain and were terrifying and definitely not fun in the moment. But this house is new for my mum, about 6 months that she's lived here. She's spiritual too, and so far she says that she's felt like if there was any energy in the house that there was one, but she hadn't felt it in a while. I bring this up to just add relevant information to this whole thing, but after I run out of explanations for the clicks, I start to remember my mum's account of the energy that she sensed before. To me, the bill fits. The weird noise and the oppressive off feeling. The possibility that I'm not alone is now running through my mind, but it hasn't hurt me this whole time, and I'm tired, so in the end I just sort of go back to scrolling on my phone and I try to ignore the paranoia. I lay there, my knees up, no blanket. I moved from Pinterest to YouTube to watch one of my comfort content creators because of the uncomfortable feeling just not going away. However, I couldn't really find safety in it because every time that I would get too engrossed in the video, a hair would sort of glide across my knee. I would reach for it and brush it away. It'd stop and then start up again. I get agitated and I look for this hair, but no matter how much I search, I just cannot find it. This goes on for 3, maybe, rounds of me feeling this hair tickle, brushing it away, and it stops and then it starts up again. All the while, the off feeling stays consistent, not getting worse, but definitely not lessening either. Just staying still, making the room feel sort of stuffy. I finally get ticked off with the hair and I go for my blanket. I grab it and start to pull it over me, and there's this weird, vivid moment of me noticing that a portion of my blanket is draped over the couch arm, hanging out of sight. And I'm suddenly scared to pull it because I'm terrified that it's about to go taut, like something has snagged it. Thankfully, that doesn't happen, and I pull it over and onto myself, getting comfortable again. Finally, I start feeling secure. I'm engrossed in my video and start to get sleepy. I've pretty much calmed down, and the off feeling goes to the back of my mind. It's not gone by any means, but it just seems to have lost interest, I guess. So I thought, at least. Next to the couch is a 2-level coffee table, and on the lower level is some newspapers, laying secure on some toys. My brother had been playing with it earlier that day, and I'm just sort of laying there watching the video when suddenly a sheet of newspaper moves from the coffee table and drags across the floor toward me quickly. It only moves a couple of inches, but it's loud, it's sudden, and I have no idea what caused it. And I certainly don't stick around to ask any questions either. I'm on my feet, phone in my hand because it was already there, scrambling over the couch and to the stairs, which I just fly up because I'm so out of my mind scared. The next thing that I know is that I'm in my mum's room standing over her, telling her what just happened. She is very sleepy, understandably, and just offers for me to sleep with her that night. Her boyfriend is at work. I crawl into bed without much option because I was not about to go back downstairs. Honestly, I am in shock, really, laying there watching Seinfeld playing quietly on her TV. She doesn't start taking me seriously, though, until she sees that I'm still not calm after 10 minutes. We talk through it, and she just says that it was Yellow Jackets in the weed. Listen, I would take that explanation for everything else, except for that newspaper. I mean, it was dragged toward me, against the airflow of the fan behind me. It was loud and the movement was violent. I really don't know how else to explain it, but it was not normal, that much was clear. 1 minute the room was silent, and then just all hell broke loose. Furthermore, the torment, it didn't even stop after I went to sleep with my mum. That off feeling just came back, and every time that she would fall asleep, more stuff would happen too. The worst being me watching the TV, and out of the corner of my eye I see a white shirt in her closet move. I keep hearing my name being harshly whispered too when I'm on the verge of falling asleep, promptly waking me up and not letting me rest. And yes, look, I know that this bit sounds more like classic paranoia, but I want to convey that it was persistent throughout the whole night, and another person, my mother, they didn't make it stop either. I don't know, I just needed to share that. Whatever the case, it was scary, and I kept getting this feeling like I was being punished by it, but for what? Who knows? I am certainly no saint, and I'd been fighting with my brother a lot this weekend. Whatever it was, paranoia or otherwise, it tormented me the entire night. Maybe it was the weed. Maybe it was Yellow Jackets. Everything that I experienced that night is not recorded. I mean, I have no proof, I know that. It sounds like paranoia as well, and who knows? Maybe it was. Well, everything except for that newspaper. That's what bothers me the most, because I just cannot explain that at all. I would like thoughts, though, some confirmation that I'm not alone. Maybe someone could tell me that it wasn't real, because there's a part of me that's scared that, well, whatever it was, has followed me home. Nothing more has happened since then, but I am on guard to it for sure, and it's really getting to me. Last night, I slept at my boyfriend's house. We don't typically sleep there, as his whole family lives there, but they were out of town for the week, so we figured that it would be nice to stay there for once. His house is a lot bigger than mine too, and for some reason big houses have always creeped me out a bit. I was already kind of feeling weird too when we were in his bedroom watching TV, but I brushed it off as an, oh, I'm just not here that often sort of thing. We went to bed at around 1:30 in the morning, but it took me a while to fall asleep. A lot of nights I'm sleeping without feeling like I'm actually sleeping, if that makes sense, but I'll sort of wake up knowing that I slept, but it feels like I had just fallen asleep, I guess. Anyways, I was having a weird dream about my job, and it kind of woke me up. It was around 3:10 in the morning, and I opened my eyes to what looked like a person on the bed next to me, sitting on their knees. It was dark, but the best way that I could describe it is that it looked like they were wearing a raincoat or something, hands in pockets. I sort of closed my eyes and opened them again because I really wasn't sure what I was seeing. But it was there, and I completely lost it. I screamed, and it woke my boyfriend up, causing him to be screaming in panic as well. I know people might say that it was just sleep paralysis, and I was really hoping so too. I mean, I've heard things here saying that people can get it when they're sleeping in sort of unfamiliar places, but the thing is that I could move and I could scream instantly. You can't do that during sleep paralysis. I honestly don't know if I could move before I screamed and just didn't notice because I was kind of in shock, but this happened in the span of probably like 5 to 10 seconds. I was able to scream and reach for him after I started screaming, so that is where I'm just really confused by this. Obviously, I'm pretty freaked out by it too, and I am someone who loves horror movies. I don't get scared often, but this has left me, well, distraught, really. We left his house right after it happened, and I felt better being at home, but now every noise that I hear, I'm jumping out of my skin. My mum has had a lot of paranormal things happen to her in her life, and I've always felt like she's very sensitive to those things. And if this has caused me to be as well, then count me the heck out. And of course, when I called her, she says, "It's okay, I've seen long-haired ladies walking out of my room, and it's no big deal." This is a big deal to me, though. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for here, but I'm having a ton of anxiety now, and I'm really just not sure what to make of any of this. If anyone could explain this, or give me some peace of mind at least, anything, that would be great, and thanks in advance. Tonight I stayed over at my friend's apartment. She lives alone in the penthouse, the very last apartment at the top of the building. The walls are tall, made of old wood and plaster, and the place has this quiet, echoing stillness that always felt a bit off to me. In any case, we were sitting in the living room for hours, just talking about life and all that. The conversation eventually shifted towards religion. I'm a deep believer, and I started sharing my thoughts about Jesus, faith, and the reality of the spiritual world. As we got deeper into the topic, we started talking about demonic activity, how important it is to protect ourselves spiritually, sleep paralysis, etc. At this point, it was past midnight. Now, in her living room, there's a sort of tall library shelf filled with books. We were sitting on the sofa about 2 meters away from it when I started feeling this strange sensation, like the atmosphere in the room changed suddenly. It got heavier, and that was when it happened. Out of nowhere, a book off the top shelf just fell, slammed onto the floor. It was loud, and both of us jumped, and the timing was chilling. It happened just as we were talking about demons, Jesus as our savior, and sleep paralysis. She turned pale and stared at the book. I tried to stay calm and told her, "See, that's exactly what happens when you call them by name. They don't like it and they try to scare you." But inside, I was scared too. I didn't want to show it though. I did not want the demonic presence in the room to feel my fear and feed off of it. I left the book on the floor, acted like nothing happened, and kept the conversation going, trying not to feed the fear. But then, at 1:20 a.m., another book fell. This time it felt intentional, like something was responding. That was too much, and I stood up and loudly called out and rebuked this thing. My friend was shaking, and she ran to the restroom to wash her face, on the verge of tears now. We stopped talking about anything spiritual after that. She begged me not to leave. She was terrified, and honestly, I don't feel great being there either, but I'm now stuck here in her apartment, sharing this on my phone, wondering if A, how do we deal with this, and will it stop, or should we pray? B, how can I calm her down and make her feel safe again? Or C, could this place actually be haunted? Has anyone else experienced something like this after talking about dark topics? Any advice would be much appreciated. This happened recently, and I just really still cannot wrap my head around it. It wasn't a dream, a prank, or some kind of an illusion. Multiple people witnessed it, in fact, both inside and outside of the door. And to this day, none of us can explain it. Here's what happened. So, a group of people that I know went into a creepy basement, the kind of place that already feels off before anything even happens. The basement door was open when they entered and the lights were on, but once they were inside, they found themselves completely locked in. They couldn't get the door open from the other side, no matter how hard they tried. Me and a friend who were upstairs, we heard them call out that they were stuck and couldn't get out. We figured that the door was jammed or something, so we went over to help. But here's where things get really weird. As we approached the basement door, the group inside later told us that they could hear us coming. They were standing about a meter from the door, facing it, waiting for us to open it. I pushed on the door and it didn't budge at first, so I sort of shoulder-checked it to get it open. It made a loud thud, not a subtle sound, and my friend was right beside me the whole time. We opened the door slightly, maybe less than halfway, and what we saw behind that door made both of us stop cold. It was pitch black. No light at all, not dim, not shadowy, just pure blackness, like a void. The kind of black that looks like it's swallowing everything behind it. We both saw it, and we both immediately felt like something was deeply wrong. There was this intense gut feeling like you're not supposed to be looking into something like that, like we were staring into something that we weren't meant to see. We freaked out, and I'm not exaggerating. I mean, we literally ran away from that door. At the time, we honestly thought maybe they're trying to scare us and maybe this was some elaborate prank. But after we talked to them later, we realized that they weren't messing with us at all. And here's the part that really gets to me. The people inside said the lights were on the entire time. They were staring at the door as we opened it, but they said that they never saw it move, not even a little. No change in lighting, no shift, no opening, nothing. They did, however, hear us approaching and hear us running away after we saw what was behind that door. But we opened that door and saw nothing but blackness, where there should have been a fully lit room. The people inside were looking right at the door, but said that it never moved at all. They heard us and we heard them, but it's like our realities didn't match up. The door wasn't even locked in any normal way. In fact, it eventually just opened for them later on its own. We still talk about this sometimes, and it wasn't just creepy. It felt like we saw something that we weren't supposed to see, like a glitch or a thin spot in reality or something. If you've ever experienced something like this, where sound, sight, or physical space just don't line up, then I would genuinely love to hear it, because this one, it still haunts the heck out of me. A couple of years ago, I needed to pick up a Facebook Marketplace find, but I didn't have a car. I found an ad on Facebook for a guy with a truck and asked if he could meet me at the pickup spot. He met me, helped me load the stuff up, and my house was just up the street, so I asked if he could give me a quick lift back, which he did. I used him a couple of more times, and so did my husband over the next few years. My husband would also accept rides from him, and sometimes if we had a lot of stuff, he would bring a friend with him to help with the moving and all that. He's a super quiet guy, never says much, and just sort of shows up and does the job and then leaves. And well, one day in April of 2024, I saw a bunch of furniture on the side of the road for garbage day that I wanted to save. The homeowner let me put it back on their porch, and I texted my truck guy asking if he could come and help me. He said sure, that he could come tomorrow, and asked if I needed a second person this time, and I said no. He gave me the rate of $100, which I thought to be pretty reasonable, if not cheap, considering that he had to drive almost an hour to get to where I am, but I figured that whatever he sets is his own rate, and so really that's that. Flash forward to the day in question. My husband is away and the pickup spot is just down the street, so I'm walking towards it and I see this truck. I also then notice that there is someone in the passenger side seat. The windows are super tinted though, so it's hard to tell, but this immediately puts me on edge because I said that I didn't need two people for this job. As I get closer and walk around the truck on the passenger side, I see that it's a woman, but she doesn't get out of the truck. He gets out and he's unexpectedly cheery to see me, asks how I'm doing and blah blah blah, and then before we have even started loading the furniture, he goes, "So will you ride with me again today?" This caught me off guard and I was like, "Oh no, don't worry, it's just up the street." He goes on to say that it's not a problem and I should just ride with him. He clears a spot in the back seat of the truck behind the passenger seat, and as we're loading, the woman finally comes out, but she doesn't say anything to me, which I thought was a bit weird. She starts to load things into the truck bed, and as we're loading up, I'm texting my husband, and I'm like, something just feels really weird. He really wants me to get on his truck. Husband says absolutely not, do not do it, and to send him the license plate, so I get a sneaky look at it and send the plate details. I tell him that I feel rude by not getting in the truck, but when the truck bed started to get full, I put some of the last items in the spot behind the passenger seat that he had cleared for me, and then both of them are like, "Oh no, that's your seat, don't do that." And they move the items from the back seat to the truck bed. I'm jokingly saying things like I'm going to walk and I need to get my steps in anyway. And when we finally finish loading, it's me, him, and her standing outside of the truck. I tell them that I'll meet them there, and again he's like, No, we'll give you a ride." This goes back and forth for actually so long, with both of them trying to convince me to get into the truck, and I'm getting more and more flustered because, like, what is even going on? Then the girl, who I assumed was a girlfriend, was like, "Would you feel more comfortable if I sat in the back seat instead, and you could sit up front?" At this point, I'm really confused. My heart is racing and I know that something is up, so I just blurt out, "I'm not getting in the truck. I listen to way too much true crime. I'm not getting in your truck, okay? I don't feel comfortable." After I say this, they just kind of start laughing like it's a funny joke. Like, "Yeah, of course, yeah, we get it." So I start walking. They drive over, and by the time that I get there, they have dumped the furniture on the front yard of the house now. She stays in the truck, and he hardly says a word to me, and I'm like, "I'll send you the transfer," and he's back to being his quiet self. Then they leave in a hurry. My adrenaline was going wild. I was so confused, and I kept replaying the interaction and seeing more and more red flags, and the crazy thing is that I would have gotten in that truck, and that was my plan all along. The night before, when chatting with my husband, I even said, "Yeah, he'll probably offer me a ride again, which will be helpful." I had fully planned on getting on that truck, and the scary thing is that if he had not acted so different right from the beginning, had he just introduced the woman and said like, "Oh, sorry, I had to grab her from work or something," and not made such a big deal about it with me getting in the truck, honestly, I would have gotten on that truck. And looking back on it, I have no doubt in my mind that they were planning to do something sinister. Why else would she notice that I was clearly uncomfortable and still try to get me on that truck? The thought that did run through my mind was the Crime Junkie podcast words to live by: be weird, be rude, and stay alive. And I do think that motto gave me the confidence to fully be like, hell no, and to stand my ground that day. So yeah, that's how I think that I was almost kidnapped. This happened like 6 to 7-ish years ago, when I was working as a supervisor at an off-license in a pretty small farming village in the middle of nowhere. It's a little past 10 p.m, closing time. My co-worker B has finished up all of our jobs, packed everything that needed to be packed away, the alarm is set, we're outside, and my key is in the motor to bring the shutter down when, all of a sudden, we both jump at the sound of a loud car engine revving to life. A second later, as the shutter meets the pavement, the offending car comes barreling around the corner and pulls up abruptly about 15 feet away, conveniently pulling up to the blind spot of the store's prehistoric CCTV cameras, I might add. Now, I'm pretty dense about cars, so I couldn't tell you what make or model it was, but whatever it was nice. Maybe a Jeep or a Land Rover or something. The kind isn't really uncommon in the area. As I said, we're a farming village, but normally you can tell when they belong to a farmer because they're caked up in mud and dust and all that. This thing, though, was a new car level kind of shiny, pitch black with matching tinted windows. It's speculation because, as I mentioned, I don't know anything about cars, but I'm sure that the windows were tinted past legal levels. We couldn't see inside at all. Whatever the case, the driver just sits there, engine still on, seemingly not going anywhere, as B and I chat between ourselves, both unconsciously stalling, waiting for whatever this is to move along. But we seem to be in a stalemate, because nobody moves for at least 5 minutes. Now, B's older than me, and I went to school with her kids, and I can tell mum mode is activated by the way that she's eyeing the car off and all that, and how she offers to drive me home that night too. She's parked further up the road, so we wouldn't have to pass the stranger's car to get to it. I lived with my parents at the other end of the road, about a 2 or 3 minute walk, but I would have had to have passed the strangers to get there for sure. Even though my nerves are on edge, I'm not ready to assume the worst, and I don't want to put her out as she lives in a different direction totally, so I sort of decline. Yeah, I know I would die first in a horror movie, but whatever. I'm content to just cross the pavement on the other side to put a little bit of distance between us, and I could leg it if I needed to. But just as I approach the edge of the pavement to start crossing, some guy jumps out of the back seat on the side facing where I was about to cross to, leaving the door open. He's not masked or wearing dark clothes or anything to that effect, but he's wearing a cap and keeping his head down, so I cannot make out his facial features. From what I can see though, he's white, easily 6 foot, and I wouldn't say big, but fit enough that he could take B or myself, who are both closer to like 5 foot, and certainly not in the best shape of our respective lives. Immediately, I start backing up, even more unnerved, and as if sensing my suspicion, he lights up a cigarette, acting nonchalant, but at the same time starts rounding the back of the car, joining B and I back on our side of the road, but for maybe 10 feet of distance. Actually, if the offer still stands, I would like a lift home after all, I say to B, and I can tell that she's relieved by my change of heart. We speed walked to her car, neither of us taking our eyes off of the other vehicle and its passenger for even more than a second. As soon as we're seated in her dinky little two-door, I pull out my phone, planning on taking a photo of the license plate. B has a similar thought, and she's rummaging in her glove box for a notepad. But before either of us manages to execute our plans, the guy who had gotten out climbs back into the back seat, and the car speeds off into the night, leaving a half-smoked cigarette in its wake. Sharing this actually makes the whole thing feel even more trivial than it did in my head at the time, but in that moment, it felt very distressing. The theory that wins out in most retellings is that they were there to rob the shop. B and I would have been easy to overpower, and presumably there was at least one other person in the car to aid in that. They could have just taken the keys from me, or they could have forced us to go in with them so I could turn off the alarm system and open the safes and all that. A few months later too, I'd moved out and was working a different job in the city, but I'd heard through the grapevine that the shop had been held at a knife point at one point. No idea if it was the same people or not, but timeline-wise, it seems possible at least. The scariest theory goes to my mother though, who watches a lot of true crime, and is certain that she could have been a police detective if not for her criminal record. She's convinced that it was a planned kidnapping, specifically for me. Her evidence being the lack of proper face coverings and the fact that they were parked in the camera's blind spots. There were more cameras in the building that they couldn't have avoided if they wanted to go in and rob the place after all. The fact that they seemed to have waited for us to leave the building. If they wanted to rob us, it would have been a lot easier to ambush us as we unlocked the door to leave, rather than having us reopen everything. The car's back door being left open was another one, and it would have made it a lot easier for them to force me inside as I walked by it. And finally, I always take the same short route to and from work for convenience, so maybe they were scoping me out for some time. Why someone would have wanted to kidnap me specifically? Well, that's a mystery. But I must say that I can see the logic in her arguments, I guess. I was already working on my notice period, but she made my stepdad drive me to and from work for all my remaining opening and closing shifts. The theory that helps me sleep at night, though, is that it was all just a coincidence. I can't explain away all the things that seemed like red flags at the time, but I can 100% believe that the owner of a seemingly very nice car didn't want his mate smoking in it, so he pulled up and argued with the guy for a few minutes about the situation and eventually convinced him to get out to smoke his half of a cigarette. Maybe they legitimately wanted to come in and buy something and were talking out alternative options after pulling up and realizing that we were closed. Whatever the motive or intention, B and I were thoroughly spooked, and I still think about what might have happened if I'd walked home instead of taking B up on her offer. So, I'm into LARPing, and for those who don't know what that is, we basically spend the weekend in the woods dressed as medieval fantasy characters and interact with each other. I go to these events with my friend and my partner, and we meet some more friends when we're there usually. Now, there are all types of people at these events, but 99.9% are absolute angels. I had yet to meet the 0.1%, but man, do I wish that I hadn't. Before the event started, a guy named Greg swung by my tent while I was setting it up. My partner and a friend were setting up the secondary tent up a path and couldn't see me at this point. There were 5 other people to my right. I had never met the guy before, but as soon as he said hi, I had a bad feeling. He was around 5'10", obese, a neckbeard, basically what would fit the description of an incel. He approaches me and asks me if I'm here alone. I say no, that I'm here with some people, but don't mention my partner or friend directly. He asks if I'm a gamer, to which I say yes. and from then on, he starts rambling on Ark Survival, which is a game that I personally have like 3,000 plus hours on. He tells me blatantly wrong info though, misnames the dinos, tells me stuff that are impossible to do in the game, even with mods, etc. And every time that I correct him, I can see that he looks to be getting even more annoyed. I end the conversation saying that I have to go back to setting up the tent, and he leaves. Fast forward to around 10 to 11 PM. The event has started, which means that any mention of the real world, such as cars, TV, pop culture, etc., is forbidden by a rule called decorum. We're playing a campfire game with my friends and my partner, and the guy comes by to sit with us. He sits next to me. I move over. He scoots closer, I move over, and he scoots again. Eventually, I get up and sit next to my friend, and as we play this game, he keeps referring to the real world and to the video game, so we tell him either to leave or to make an effort and speak properly, and he chooses to leave. Now, the next day I go up a trail for fake hunting or gathering resources. As I come back down towards the village, in the middle of the woods with no camps that I can hide in, he's there waiting for me on the trail. He then asks if I would like to go and get a coffee or something sometime, to which I answer, no thanks. As we go down the trail, I tell him that I have to collect plants for my potions, so if he could excuse me, I'll be going back to the village to leave my bow and collect my basket. I'm walking pretty fast. He follows me though, grabs my arm and tells me that I could come with you, me alone in the woods looking for plants. That's like the perfect scenario. I freak out at that and walk very fast down the trail to the village. My neighbors see me and they look very concerned. They ask if I need help and I tell them, in an honesty way, which is a code to say take me seriously, this isn't part of the game, that this dude is being extra creepy and following me. They take their weapons, foam weapons, and tell him to get lost before they carve him a new one. I stay with them for a few minutes before chilling with my friends. Night eventually comes and we're having fun. Stuff is happening in terms of fighting and encounters. Then at around midnight, I decide to go to the bathroom. At that point, I haven't seen this guy since around 7 PM. As I come back from the bathroom in complete darkness, this guy jumps from a bush and pins me against a tree all of a sudden. He tells me that he's not proud of me, that I've been leading him on, that he doesn't understand why I would hold another guy's hand and hug 3 other guys but not him. I tell him that I hold my fiance's hand and I do hug my friends, but he's neither. I also tell him to stop this, in all honesty, to which he answers, but what if in all honesty I just want a little kiss, huh? Just a little kiss and then you can go. I yell no and try to hit him to get away. My friends who were right on the other side of the bridge separating us heard me scream. They took their weapons, called upon my neighbors, and around 10 people came careening down the bridge to help. The guy let me go and turned to my rescuers, saying that he was just interrogating me for information concerning the demons, our foes. My friends who have seen this guy being a jerk before tell him not to move, that they're going to get the owner of the LARP to deal with him. He tried to dissuade them, but my neighbors tell him to sit down or he'll be visiting Death's altar before he can move. I'm taken away by my fiancé, who is very worried and concerned about what had happened. The owner comes and I explain what happened, and he takes Greg outside the play to discuss. And from what I heard, he was kindly asked to not come back for any future events. I live alone in a studio, and to make it feel bigger, I separate the end of my mattress that isn't facing the wall with a big tapestry, sort of like a hospital curtain, I guess. I was about to go to sleep and was laying down in my bed on my phone. I wasn't listening to any music or anything, and after like 20 minutes of lights out and laying down, I hear this panting right on the other side of my tapestry. It sounded like when a dog, sniffing really hard with its snout, is all up in a jar or whatever. I turned on my flashlight without getting up first to just see if maybe an animal or something got in. I even said get out twice and the panting continued. But after that, it almost seemed like they got more dragged out and breathy between pants. I also then started hearing shifting and almost like skittering over into my kitchen and bathroom area, also conveniently out of my sight. Eventually, I got up and turned on the lights and it all just sort of stopped, except for occasional house settling or rustles now and then. And of course, nothing was there. Nothing was out of place. I couldn't see any pests around or anything. But I definitely slept with the lights on that night, to say the least. We live in Australia, and for one of my birthdays years ago, pre-kid life, my husband booked an Airbnb cabin on a property in a rainforest area, about 2 hours from our home. This was a property where the owners lived on a few acres and had 3 cabins in various spots, was bordering a national park. The rainforest is one of the oldest remaining in the world, and is on the World Heritage List. It was a modest little 1-bedroom cabin close to the main house, styled very vintage-like, no Wi-Fi or internet or even TV. We just enjoyed pottering around the rainforest and the beautiful creeks for the first day and night. It was nice and peaceful, but it did have a bit of an odd vibe to it, I'll give it that. Well, the second night was not so peaceful. That night I noticed it was eerily quiet, like dead, absolute quiet. Not a single insect or bird even making a noise. It was not natural for a wildlife area, and I sort of felt watched and on edge a little. But I didn't think too much of it, and we went to bed as usual. But later that night, I have this vivid dream that standing at the end of my bed was this ghastly thin old lady in a nightgown, grinning at me with this evil grin with wide eyes, and she claws up at me to grab me. I wake up horrified and instantly look over at my husband. He is already awake, and he appears, well, terrified for lack of a better word. He asks if I'm okay and what's wrong. I say it's nothing. I keep staring at the end of the bed, and so does he. We put the bathroom light on to sleep that night, and neither of us discussed why. Neither one of us sleeps, and we spend a horrible night basically waiting for dawn, and we leave shortly afterward. Now, on the drive home, I asked him why he was awake and that he looked so scared. And he told me that he couldn't sleep because he just couldn't shake the feeling that something was at the end of the bed and watching us. I asked what he thought it was, and he told me that he kept seeing like a creepy, vague outline of an old woman. I hadn't yet told him about my dream, and then I told him, and we were very weirded out, and now refer to it as our haunted cabin holiday. So, we've lived in the same new mobile home, manufactured trailer house, for 2 years on land that my husband's family has owned for almost 100 years. And well, lately, weird things have been happening. The other day, my husband and I were talking as I was walking out of our bedroom. The light was on and he was walking inside of it. Then he said my name in a slightly sort of concerning tone. I turned around and said, "What?" But the light was suddenly off. Hubby asked, "Did you turn the light off when you walked out?" I shook my head confused. "No, did you?" "No, I was getting undressed by the closet." Which meant that the switch had somehow been flipped. Our 6-year-old was in the other room, and our 2-year-old can't reach up that high. So we just sort of look at each other like, what the actual heck? The fact that this happened isn't the most concerning part though. You see, the other night, I was sitting on the couch close to midnight, scrolling through my phone when I heard a noise like a flip of a switch. And sure enough, as I looked toward the hall bathroom light, which is usually on a night light for our 6-year-old, it was off. Then I hear it again, the flip of a switch, and the light cuts on. I stare at the hall, absolutely flabbergasted as to what had happened. I never mentioned it to my husband because, for all 6'2" and 240 pounds that he is, the man is definitely jumpy. Nothing like this has happened like it before in the 2 years of living here, but I'm 10 weeks pregnant with our second child. With my first pregnancy, I always felt like someone was always watching us or would hear footsteps walking down the hall of our old home. I had nightmares of someone snatching my husband away. His mother had recently passed when I was 18 weeks pregnant with our first kid. Maybe I'm being sensitive in this pregnancy, but this is the first time my husband and I witnessed something like this together. So, what do you guys think? Back in 2021, my husband and I went on a couples trip with a group of 8 other friends to the mountains of Gatlinburg, Tennessee for the weekend. We drove the 4 hours, made it to the cabin, and got all settled in. While we were waiting for the last couple to arrive, who were bringing their kids, we ended up deciding not to wait and go out to dinner about 20 minutes up the road from our cabin. We took 2 cars, me, A, my husband M, L and J in mine, and Z, E, D, and C in the other. Z, E, D, and C left ahead of us and we trailed behind. I was driving a 2011 Subaru Outback at the time, and my phone was mounted on one of those cabin fan blowers. We were chatting, having a great time catching up, listening to music on low. Halfway to the restaurant, we get a call from our friend Y. I turn the music down, I hit accept on the call with everyone in the car yelling their hellos, and all of a sudden we hear a woman screaming, crying and pleading, "No, stop, don't do this," with more crying, screaming and begging as we immediately all fell silent. Everyone in the car flies into a panic. Me and my husband, we were scrambling to put the phone on speaker, everyone yelling out her name. Then the screaming cuts off, like the call just ended, and our friend Y comes through the phone, calm and collected with a, "Hey guys, we just made it to the cabin." We are still yelling and asking her if she's okay, and she responds in a confused voice that they're all fine, and that they just made it in but needed the door code. We explained to her that we had just heard crying and screaming, and we thought that she was getting murdered or attacked, to which she let us know that, no, we're doing fine. Her kids aren't freaking out, and they're doing great too. We give her the code and finish up the call in shock, and, we all heard that. It sounded too real, and Y has never been one to play games like that. The rest of the car ride, we're all freaked out and trying to rationalize the whole thing, to think of what or who that could have possibly been. In the parking lot, explaining the weird occurrence to our friends who made it there before us, an ambulance drives by with its siren and lights on, back the way that we had just come. So could it have been a weird frequency that we picked up on somebody actually getting hurt? Did something hijack the phone call? Well, whatever it was, it thoroughly freaked us all out, and our explanation is, well, maybe it was paranormal. So my buddy and I, who were in college at the time, we were back in our little hometown for the weekend. That Saturday night, we were driving around getting high and just drinking beer. We were driving around on dark country roads and it was pitch black that night, overcast with no moon. We stopped on a dirt road to take a bit of a leak and roll another joint. My buddy who was driving left the car running but turned the lights off. We didn't see any other cars or people around us for like miles. But my buddy starts rolling the joint and the overhead light inside the car is on. Then he happens to glance up toward the front of the car, acts startled, and flips on the headlights. We look out the car windows and see a whole group of guys around the car. We both yelled some choice words, he slammed the car into gear, and we hauled butt out of there. Those guys, they were probably people that we knew from town. I even thought that I recognized one of them, but I've always wondered what in the heck they were doing out in the middle of nowhere like that, on a pitch-black night, without flashlights and apparently on foot, and then surrounding our car like that. I've never been one to really believe in the paranormal. Not that I often wondered about supernatural phenomenon outside of seeking a good scare now and then, like on YouTube or whatever, but I always assumed that what I was watching were either good hoaxes or had some logical explanation that wasn't immediately apparent to me. That was, until this past weekend, when myself and my girlfriend had an unexplainable appearance. Funny how that works, right? Complete disbeliever until an encounter of your own. Well, we were staying in an Airbnb in Belfast, Northern Ireland, with it being a small townhouse in a council estate. The upstairs, where our bedroom was separated from a second bedroom by a tiny landing. Upon waking up on Friday, the 13th, we started getting ready for the day. I was sat at the end of the bed pulling my socks on when I looked up and I saw a human shadow on the curtain of the bedroom across the landing from us. Not realizing what it was yet, I made a remark about how that wasn't creepy at all, and my girlfriend peered around the corner to see what I was talking about. Oh, was the only thing she could muster up in response to me. Seeing that she was unsettled, I marched into the second bedroom and pulled back the curtain to see what was casting the shadow, thinking that it was going to be something silly like a tribute to Queen Lizzie stuck on the window, but there was nothing there. It was also the second story, so I wasn't expecting to see an actual person peering in or anything, but I wasn't expecting to see nothing at all. Also, there was nothing outside that could have cast that shadow. I pulled the curtain back into position, thinking, that's weird. And the shadow was still there. Still in a state of somewhat disbelief, I walked back to the doorframe to see if it was my shadow, but my shadow didn't even come close to reaching the curtain. With the pair of us completely creeped out, we went back to our room to get ready to get out of the house for the day as quickly as we could. My girlfriend peered back around the corner when we were almost finished, to discover that the shadow was still there but had now shifted to the left. After that, we threw the rest of our clothes on, and when we looked again, it was completely gone. We have no idea how long it was there watching us, but from the moment that we became aware of it, it was gone within about 5 minutes. The second and last night that we slept there, we slept with the door closed, which we hadn't the first night, and it wasn't there the following morning. My girlfriend thinks that it's because we slept with the door closed the second night that it didn't show up, as it couldn't watch us. Personally, I struggled with finding an explanation for it, but there's just really nothing logical about it. There was nothing there that could have casted it, and it was still there when I pulled the curtain back into position, which was really strange. I mentioned this whole thing to our Airbnb host, but they didn't seem to register any recognition of it. We're both absolutely certain about what we saw though, and from looking up shadow people, it seems like it is a phenomena that people experience. But can anyone give us any sort of reason as to why this shadow person visited us of all people? Thanks for listening. About 20 years ago, I had one of the most perplexing things happen to me while I was out having a cigarette. It was about 2 a.m. and I had woken up in the middle of the night. After tossing and turning, I just could not get back to sleep that night, so I decided to go out and have a smoke. For reference, I live in an apartment with a small cement patio out front. It's on a very busy street, with a sidewalk that runs alongside of it. While the street was loud and busy during the day, it was actually very peaceful to sit out there at night. All my neighbors were sleeping and the night was cool and calming. Anyway, while I was sitting on my patio steps, a large dark-colored animal came into view from a distance. It was walking on the sidewalk, and for some reason my freeze response kicked in. I became a brick, and the hair on my arms was raised. While it walked slowly toward me, I tried to make out what kind of animal it was. It was easily as big as a horse. I do know that sometimes people walk their horses around town, even though this is a large city, but there was no rider on this creature. Is it an escaped horse? The closer it got, though, the more confused I was. Honestly, it resembled a large black panther or maybe a lion-bear hybrid or something. It had black fur that was kind of wavy or curly. I could see the steam from its breathing, and the crazy thing is that it did not seem to be aware of my presence at all. Maybe that's why I stayed frozen, letting my cigarette burn out completely. It was almost like I knew if I moved that it would kill me. My body did eventually let me move, but I must have been out there for a good 30 minutes, scared out of my mind to move. Honestly, I don't know that much about these things, but I feel like I saw something that I wasn't supposed to see that night. I feel like it was from a different dimension or something, and I just got a bit of a peek. I've had a few paranormal type encounters, and another perplexing glitch that happened recently. It always feels the same too, like I'm just getting a bit of a glimpse behind the veil or something. But please, tell me someone out there, somebody else has seen this creature. It also haunted me more than any other unexplained experience that I've had. I've tried talking about it with other people, and they usually just say something patronizing like, wow, that's crazy, and really, that's about it. I recently moved to Wisconsin, and I wanted to explore the backcountry 2 falls ago, so I took a trip from the south to Superior, mostly off-road and on fire roads and whatnot. On my second night, I was in the North Woods, and it was getting pretty late, so I was on a back road in heavy forest, and decided to find a spot to sleep in my truck. I went down a dirt road, probably 2 miles or so down the dirt road. At this point, it was very dark, roughly 8 p.m. and absolutely no one for miles. I found a trail in the forest and drove about 100 feet into the woods, and I parked, completely concealed from the dirt road that I was just on. I got out to assess the area, but couldn't see anything as it was completely dark. I got back in the truck, and I set up for the night. About an hour into watching a movie on my phone, I heard a sound that sounded like a woman screaming, and my dog heard it too. I grabbed my pistol, turned on all my lights, and opened the door to see what it was. Mind you, absolutely no one knew that I was out there, and I was far from civilization. I didn't see or hear anyone, so I ducked back into my truck. I'll admit too that I was a little bit freaked out, but I figured that it must have been wildlife. I don't know, I rationalized it. In any case, maybe about an hour later I was falling asleep, and I felt my truck move as if someone had pushed on it. Again, my dog woke up too, so I knew that it wasn't my imagination. I didn't turn on any lights or make a sound, but my dog seemed very uneasy all of a sudden. I told myself that if I heard anything else, I would get out of Dodge. Well, I ended up falling asleep, and maybe around midnight I woke up to my dog growling, and it happened again. I put on my boots and hopped in the driver's seat, and I just got out of there. Now, as I was driving out, I went around a corner on the dirt road, and I'm not sure if it was my imagination or what, but I swear that I saw a tall, skinny thing running off the road as I came around the corner. It took about 30 minutes to get down the road because I continued down the original dirt road and did not get back the way that I'd come from. By this point, it was raining pretty hard, and I just didn't feel comfortable being anywhere dark anymore. I drove about an hour, and I finally found a gas station and ended up staying the night there. but I have never been so scared in my life before, and honestly, it takes a fair bit to get me feeling that way. I don't know what it was, but I know it was not human, whatever was out there. That much is very clear. So my wife and I had a couple of creepy incidences, and this one happened near Hope, BC, way up in the mountain. My wife was probably more freaked out than me, but maybe I'm just downplaying this. The second story, though, is something that absolutely terrified me. So, we were camping in the literal middle of nowhere between two mountaintops. It was forest fire season, so we could only have a small propane fire that night. We finally decided to go to bed, and we climb into our tent. We're laying there and talking, and by this point it was almost completely dark, when all of a sudden we see through our tent wall. It's not see-through, by the way. A glowing purple ball that starts where I assume was the tree line, and then up into the sky, and we could hear a light buzzing sound, and then it went silent. I grabbed my rifle and went outside, but I didn't see anything. In fact, it was almost as if nothing had happened. I chalked it up to a power line that had broken, but we've both explored that area earlier in the day for fun, and I can assure you that there were no power lines for, well, I don't know, there's just none really there. There's also nothing on Google Maps either, but that one is not that creepy sounding, I'll admit. But in the moment it was a what the heck is that sort of thing. My wife hasn't camped in a tent ever since then, and that was like 7 or 8 years ago. This next instance happened about 5 years ago. My wife and I flew down to LA and rented a camper van and drove it east to go to Zion, Bryce, and Dead Horse, I think it's called. But we were on our way to Moab from Bryce Canyon, and I was on the highway. I can't remember exactly where, but somewhere in Utah. I've planned our trip based on where we would camp each night. Everything was pretty much via Google Earth, so I couldn't tell what was what, but one of the places that I planned to stay at, we had to go down this dirt road for miles and miles towards something that looked like a cool camping spot from Google Earth. We get to the spot, and the thing that I saw on Google was a cool giant, and I mean a massive rock boulder. A very small mountain, in fact. More like a giant hill, I guess, kind of growing into it. We set up camp there. The ground was untouched, and it seemed like no one had ever been there before because the dry soil was very soft, and you would leave deep footsteps in the dirt, and there were no tracks anywhere, not even animal. So I go to the mountain, and I collect some firewood for the night. I also collect some large flat rocks to make as a sort of wind guard, as it started getting very windy all of a sudden. We notice some ravens on top of the rock cawing at us and kind of flying in a weird circle around the area. We joke about how maybe this is a warning, and how it reminds me of the Halloween episode of The Simpsons where Bart is a raven. Anyway, we eat and we go to bed. At some point, though, I wake up in the middle of the night sort of randomly, and my body is covered in goosebumps, and my hair on my entire body feels like it's standing up. I start getting anxiety, too. I feel like someone or something is just outside of the van. The wind is blowing hard, and our van is rocking a bit from it, so that's making things worse. I'm laying there not moving in fear that something is peeking in when my wife says to me, "I'm really freaked out right now and I don't want to be here." I didn't know she was awake as well and justified the way my body is responding, but she later told me that she had chills and her hair was all standing up. I say, you know what, to heck with this, we're out of here. After mustering up the courage to move, I climb to the front of the vehicle to get it started and drive out of there, slowly as to not drive too fast and crash. We get maybe a few hundred meters away and the wind died down, and both of our anxiety and fear went away, which creeped us out even more, I guess. We eventually went back to bed, except I slept with my axe, like that would help, but we slept well and woke up at daylight feeling fine. and we both said heck no to making breakfast here, as we didn't want to get out of the van at all. The kitchen was only accessible through the back doors. I drove a couple of kilometers away until we felt safe enough to get out and take our morning pee. We were all shaken up from the night before, and we didn't know what the heck that was. We didn't see any footsteps in the dirt around where the van was parked when we were driving out there in the morning, aside from our footsteps which led to our makeshift fire pit. We were so freaked out by whatever happened that night before that when we got to Moab hours later, we actually rented a hotel and didn't want to sleep at all in the van overnight. Anyway, years later, we were watching a documentary about missing people in parts of the US close to national forests and found out that the area that we were in was actually a huge hotspot, and that we were very close to Skinwalker Ranch. That's kind of crazy to me after knowing all the history about that place and hearing all the stories, but it's something that I'll never forget. In fact, I still get chills, even just sharing this. I never thought living alone in a dorm hall could be so unsettling. When I first moved in, I was the only resident on my floor, which was strange but not something that I dwelled on. The hall was eerily quiet most of the time, except for the man in room 217. He was a tall black guy, always dressed in pajamas, and from the first night, my friends and I noticed something wasn't quite right. We often heard him screaming, his voice piercing through the walls in the dead of the night. It wasn't angry shouting like I had thought at first. No, he was screaming for help. Every night, the same loud shrieking cry for help. At first we thought that he was just a troubled student, someone who needed help but didn't know how to ask for it in the right way. We even joked that he had serious issues, but deep down it disturbed all of us. His pleas were so loud, so desperate that they left a lingering unease. One night, after hearing that same shriek echoing through the empty hall, I went over to his door to see if I could talk to him. I knocked, but just like the other times I tried, the screaming stopped the second that I got close. The door remained closed, and the silence was deafening. The next day I went to the dorm office ready to tell them that the guy in room 217 needed serious help, but when I asked, the dorm manager looked confused. "There's no one living in that room," she said. "You're the only student in that hall." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew what I had heard, what my friends had heard. We had all seen him. How could there be no one there? After digging deeper, we uncovered the truth. Room 217 had been the home of a student years ago, one who had taken his own life. He had been struggling, crying out for help in the days before his death, but no one had been there to listen. Now, it seemed as if his spirit was trapped in the hall, forever screaming that same desperate plea for help that had gone unanswered in life. We also learned that the school itself had a dark history. Before it had become a college, the building had been a hospital during the First World War. The laundry room, where we had always noticed a foul stench and dry blood stains, had once been the morgue. The history of the place felt heavy, like it had absorbed the tragedies of all those who had passed through it. The screaming eventually stopped, but I'll never forget the nights that I lay in bed, listening to the ghost in room 217 crying out for help like that. It wasn't just a haunting in the end too. It was a reminder of how much can be left unresolved, how easily cries for help can be missed. And in that old haunted building, his was a voice that just wouldn't let anyone forget. So we live in the Philippines, and my family has a lot of connections and experiences to not just ghosts but creatures from local folktales. Almost every generation, there would be someone born with the ability to see ghosts, like my sister, who had a stronger third eye from what I've heard, but even without it, entities always follow and appear before us, especially in my grandparents' house, which hilariously even once caused a breakup to happen with one of my aunts. One such instance of these sightings was when one of my cousins, Elle, was hanging out in our grandparents' house, and for a while, she said that it was at least 10 to 20 minutes, was talking with one of our aunts. That day, they were the only ones in the house as the others were out, and she said that the entire time she was talking to our aunt, her name's Aunt Jay, not once did she speak out or react while she kept on talking and asking questions. After this, though, she went to the kitchen to grab a cup of water, but was shocked to see Aunt Jay in the kitchen. When Aunt Jay saw Elle, she asked for help in the kitchen, but Elle quickly asked her, "If you're here, then who was I talking to in the living room?" They both stared at each other just before they both heard someone call out, "Elle, can you come here for a bit?" in the voice of our Aunt Jay. Now, the saying goes in our country that you should never meet your doppelganger or you'll die. Knowing this, they both ran out through the back and waited by the front of the house. While waiting that thing out, Elle saw Aunt Jay in the windows of one of the bedrooms fixing the curtains and immediately told Aunt Jay, who was beside her, to not look, because she can see her in the window, moving like a normal human. Not doing anything unusual or creepy, just there doing chores looking exactly like her. It's a story they rarely ever want to talk about because, well, it was a really freaky event for them. This is the exact same aunt, though, who, in her childhood, while sleeping with her sisters, saw a man with skin as black as coal with blood-red eyes looking at her through a window. She screamed and woke up her sisters, and they also saw what had scared her. My grandparents thought that it was some creep, but when they ran outside, machetes in hand, it dawned on them that the window was at least 2 meters off the ground, and no one in our town, or possibly even the whole city, could look or be that tall. Our great-grandparents had connections with authorities to the point that my grandmother never had boyfriends since the police always were watching her, so they would have known. The window was by a tree where the stories are told that is the house of different kinds of entities, especially of an unbelievably tall man, skin as black as coal, smokes a giant cigar, and would take, in some stories, kids, women, and in some rare cases, even young boys. When I was 17, many years ago now, I was on my way to town A-Line. It was pouring rain, cool outside, and I saw a girl who looked around my age hitchhiking and stopped to pick her up. I lived outside of a very small town at the time, and possible danger never really crossed my mind. She was kind of quiet during the 45-minute drive, so we listened to some music. When we got to town, she had me pull over at the gas station, and she pulled out this huge knife from her backpack, laid it on her thigh and said, "And I will never forget this. I was going to kill you and take your car, but you're a sweet kid. Don't ever pick up hitchhikers." Then she just got out of the car and walked away. I have never been so shocked and terrified in my entire life, and I've not picked up another hitchhiker since. This is a story that I've been wanting to tell for a long time. It's raining heavily now, so I decided to take advantage of that and tell it. I have to admit that I feel a little bit nervous about sharing this, but here it goes. So, the year is 2020. At the time, I was still going to school and also working. My sister was about 24 years old. My best friend used to come to my place for the weekend, and I always used it as an escape from work and school. I love spending time with him. My sister, although a little more serious and a few years older than us, liked to spend time with us too, and she also cooked while we played games, and it became a bit of a tradition. And one day, a festival was held in our town, so I arranged with that friend to meet in the town. I hung out with my sister all the time, so I took her with me and we met together with that friend. We visited the parks in the city and looked for a place to just relax a bit, but it all became a bit boring soon. Near the church, I saw a house that looked kind of poor, but there was a lot of shoes there, as if the house was full. My friend told me that apparently a psychic lives there and works there and charges for his services and even heals people. And of course, being the age that we were, it occurred to us to check this out. I wasn't a believer at the time by any means, so even the thought of something like this was just kind of funny to me, I guess. We entered that house though, and as soon as I stepped in, I smelled something wet, if I could call it that. Some people exited the room and others were waiting. The house felt very cold. To the right of the entrance is the room where the man works, and that's where we met him. In the middle of the room sat a man wearing a white suit. We greeted him, and without a word, he just pointed with his hand where to sit. After that, we had a light conversation, nothing too significant. After a few minutes, he started doing what we came for. My sister was the first in line, and it seemed to me that at one point she sort of fell into a trance, and I, the guy who only believes in science, explained it as sort of hypnosis, I guess. She started to cry and laugh, and she's doing it all as he says for her to do things. When she came out of the trance, he said that he cast a curse on her, and that the only way to get rid of it is to be with him in marriage. I immediately said that that was enough for me, it's time to go, and that he was a drug addict and a lunatic. Now, for 3 months or a little more, I planned a trip to another country together with my sister and parents. Light music in the car and we're driving, and as soon as we entered another country, the phone rang at the same moment, and to my shock, it was this guy. He began asking me why we were going to another country, if we were running away from him. We had an argument over the cell phone, and to this day I still don't know how he knew that we were in another country, or how he even had our number. After that, pictures of my sister with strange padlocks on began arriving at the address. There were dozens of pictures, and on each of them was a real padlock that pierced the picture and was attached to it. Eventually, we were forced to call the police, but really in the end they just couldn't do anything. There are still hateful messages from fake profiles, but the harassment eventually somehow stopped. I don't know how. I mean, maybe he got bored, or maybe he just saw that there was no fruit from all of the energy that he was expending, and he just stopped. Nine years ago, I had met a person that to this day I still wish I never did. I was an isolated, bullied, and depressed 8th grader, with the added state of being a plus-sized kid in a sports-centric town. So basically, I was beaten and ridiculed on a daily basis. I couldn't make any friends with my new classmates. All of my old friends from elementary school got placed in different classes, and nobody was in the same after-school groups as me anymore, and we were also all in a scout group, but that disbanded before I got into middle school. I was so lonely that if someone talked to me without picking on me, honestly, it made me happy. So I had a Google Plus account, the only social media I could access at school, that I kept hidden from my parents, that I would use to check out my favorite fandoms, and hopefully use to make some new friends. One day, I was on Google Plus in the computer lab, and I had commented under a piece of fan art of a character that I liked. The person who made the post had replied to me not even a minute later. I remember getting very excited seeing that notification, my heart swelling. The two of us spent the next 10 minutes of my class just sort of talking to each other in the comments section. We ended up replying so much that we flooded a good portion of the comments with our talk. After I had to change classes, I logged back in on one of the Chromebooks that we had stored in the back of the class and saw that she had actually messaged me. Her name was Haley. At least, she told me that was her name. Years later, I'm really not so sure it was actually her name. But in the message that I got, Haley told me that she was 2 years older than me and that we had a lot of things in common. I spent the rest of the school day on my phone, not really caring about anything in my classes at all. We talked for the next week in our DMs until she suggested that we message each other in a private chat room. Later that day, we made a private chat on an online messaging site, and we had our first conversation in messages. Then Haley asked if we could also do a voice call. I told her that I wasn't sure about that, but she told me that it was only going to make holding a conversation better with me. And eventually, after she asked me multiple times, I gave in. After an hour of us talking, she then suggested that we video chat. I agreed, both to make sure that she was actually my age, but also to put a name to her face. Haley turned on her camera, and she did look in the same age range as I did. I don't know why, but that fact still haunts me more than anything else, really. The fact that she looked so close to my age, plus she easily smiled and spoke really friendly to me, made me feel that I had nothing to be afraid of, really. That led me to quickly believe, though, that I could trust her. We ended up talking for hours afterward, with me practically on cloud 9 the entire time. In the beginning of our little friendship, things were going alright too. We told each other about our schools, what we looked like, what we liked, and gushing over our favorite series that we liked too. We talked almost every day, and stayed up late talking nearly all night sometimes. We even exchanged a couple of silly pictures of ourselves and memes back and forth a lot. After we had been talking for about 6 months, Haley asked me if I would like to meet her friends. At first, I was kind of ecstatic, and the thought of having more friends made me so excited that I didn't think twice before saying yes. Haley invites me in, and I got to meet her other friends. I had a completely different feeling about these people, though, compared to what I felt with Haley. Something made me feel unsafe in that chat room, even though they all seemed nice and that Haley reassured me that I could trust them. It felt like my instincts were trying to warn me, but I wasn't sure about what, so in the end I sort of ignored it. Most of them, though, were much older than me. In a chat with her main friends, there were 6 other people. Most of them were at least 18 to 19, but there were 2 guys that I distinctly remember being in their 20s. I asked how they all met, and they told me that they all met either on social media sites or from real life, but really wouldn't answer any more of my questions. I was a bit naive, so all of the red flags that were popping up went completely over my head. But from constant loud talking to frequently overlapping each other, the calls that I was on with them were just pure chaos. The messages were even worse though, because they would frequently drop cuss words and topics that really should not be brought up with someone who was still a minor. I tried building genuine connections with them though, but they all acted dismissive to me and acted like I was just annoying whenever I tried to talk in a conversation. Needless to say, I didn't like them very much. Haley, on the other hand, was all about them. She would pull the exact same habits, jokes, dirty words, and all of that with the others. They could say something super problematic, but she would be laughing right along with them. I was shocked by this version of Haley because she never acted like this with me when it was just the 2 of us. We still talked a bunch, but slowly she was talking to her other friends more than she was with me. At first, I thought that it was fine, but the more she ignored my messages or didn't pick up my calls, the more I got bothered by this whole thing. When I called to confront Haley about blowing me off, she just went ballistic on me too, saying that I was being selfish and that I didn't want her to talk to her other friends because I was jealous. I explained that that wasn't true, but she just wouldn't listen, and then she hung up on me. Haley then ghosted me for almost a month, leaving me worried and upset over what had happened. When she started talking to me again, I was so emotionally distraught. I was crying on our first call and apologizing for what I said the last time we talked. She told me that it was fine. She just needed some time alone and that she would talk to me a bit more. And indeed she did, although not exactly what I thought she would do. Haley began to tell me that she had depression and that was the reason why she wouldn't talk to me for a month. I didn't judge her about it and just said that whatever she needed to talk about, that she could come to me. This led to her trauma dumping on me nearly every day, talking about her terrible home life and how bad her relationship was with her mum and how much she hated herself. I was there to offer an ear and some kind words whenever Haley called or messaged me about it, but this quickly became part of a routine. Almost daily, in the middle of us having any kind of conversation, she'd begin complaining about anything happening during her day. If not that, it would be about how ugly she thought she was, or how much her life sucked and wanted to end things. The last one freaked me out a lot though. I was worried about her because we lived in different states and I couldn't help her in person. Every time she would become self-deprecating, I would say otherwise, giving her compliments and words of affirmation for so long my throat ached and felt raw. And then, just as fast as she'd bring it up, she'd drop that conversation and we'd talk like we were before. Haley also began calling for long periods of time and messaging me late into the night. Phone calls would stretch for hours at a time and her texts would come in until like 3 or 4 in the morning even. The thing was that it was mainly her talking now. Like every phone call, she'd take over the conversation. If I didn't message her back quickly enough, she'd spam multiple texts back to back faster than I can read them. I would try to end them myself, but every time I would try, Haley would chastise me for wanting to leave our conversation when not long ago I wanted to have her attention. She basically guilt-tripped me back into talking to her, and honestly it worked. Even if I had lost interest in our talks, or didn't want her to message me during class, I would still let her talk and reply. At least I still had her attention though, and she still wanted to talk to me. This all went on in a cycle for 2 years, and it left me feeling more anxious and exhausted than anything else ever did. It felt like we had nothing in common anymore, and she either ghosts me for a week or spends the entire weekend texting me non-stop. The topics of her self-worth have also gotten worse. They escalated to her messaging me goodbye or I can't live like this anymore, without responding to any of my following messages or calls. Alongside of that, she would send me pictures of her, marking herself, telling me about how it felt to do it. The sight of those messages would send me into panic attacks, and every time I would panic and message her afterward, I would be sent into tears. Not only that, but the group chat with her other friends got worse. Arguments broke out frequently, drama and gossip spread like an oil spill, and it led to people being blocked, unblocked, almost every few days in fact, and I hated talking to them. They began ganging up on me in messages, and Haley was often the first one to make rude jokes about me that they would all laugh at. I began getting sick of it, and would stop messaging and calling both Haley and her friends, despite her begging me to. One late night though, while the group was in an argument over text, I hit my breaking point. I was tired of all the drama and them treating me like this all the time, so I messaged the group chat that I'd had enough of them and privately messaged Haley that I needed a break. Then I left both chat rooms, blocked everyone that I talked to, deleted my messaging account, and deleted the site from my computer's history. Once it was all over, I honestly felt like I had been freed from some kind of prison, and all I could do was cry in relief and euphoria over the whole thing being over. But here's the creepy part. So, I later found out that all of the pictures that Haley had sent me, that they were all stock images and photoshopped. I also found out from a bit of digging through her background, a lot of things just didn't add up. For instance, I learned that she was actually a lot older than what she originally told me, at least 6 years older than me in fact, meaning that when we first met when I was 14, she was at least about 20 years old. Many things from our interactions still haunt me, especially the pictures of her marks and her scathing, self-deprecating messages. In fact, for almost 3 months I would have nightmares about Haley getting back in contact with me and what she would say or do to me. I have better friends now, and I'm absolutely certain that I'll never have to hear from Haley again, but sometimes I still wonder who that woman really was, and what was it about me that she was interested in. Hopefully I won't ever have to find out, but I was lied to a lot by that woman. And now that I'm older and I look back on the whole thing, that whole situation was not okay and extremely creepy. A few weeks ago, I was driving in the middle of nowhere heading to one of my friend's place. My wife was sleeping next to me while my teenage daughters were watching a movie in the back. Next to them, my toddler was playing with his toys, and it must have been around 1 a.m. I was a bit nervous as the drive there seemed to last forever, and I was getting a bit tired too. The dirt road with no lights gave me chills as all I could see around were only fields. The road had many holes, and I was trying to avoid them as best as I could. I was very focused on that when I saw in front of the car a luggage bag. It was in the middle of the road on my side. On the other side was a car parked facing us. The car was completely in the dark, as there were no lights inside or outside of it. I didn't want to drive over the luggage, so my first instinct was to go out and move it. Man, was I lucky though that my wife was with me that day. She grabbed my hand and indicated to me that something just wasn't right. One person was in the field, looking at something on his phone, the reason for which my wife saw him in the first place. I turned the car around and I was ready to leave this road when 2 people jumped in front of us from the field. There was no space on the road, so I couldn't go without harming them. 2 people were in front of my car now. There was also the luggage bag, a car, and the person checking their phone in the field behind us. I didn't know what to do, so really I did the only thing that I thought of. I just turned around again, facing the luggage, and just drove over it. Fortunately, there was nothing inside of it to damage my car, so we got out of this situation unharmed. We eventually arrived at my friend's house, and everything was fine after that, and we had a great time there. But I still get chills when I think about this incident. I mean, the whole thing was pretty obviously a setup, and if I had gotten out of the car, what would they have done? I work with adults with disabilities, so do take this story with a grain of salt. But he would walk about seeing a girl with no mouth around the house. For example, when he couldn't find his hat, the girl with no mouth would take it. One of my responsibilities was checking on him when he went to bed each night too. I had assisted him with bed and left him with his mask in his lap and stepped out so that he could get it on and get comfortable. I had left his light on and his door cracked so I could just peek in, turn off the light, and had went down the hall a bit. I was about 10 feet away, just looking at a bulletin board when I started to hear him laugh. Curious, I came down to see what he was laughing at, and when I poked my head in, he said, "I caught you." What? I said. "I caught you. What did you catch me doing?" I was laughing a bit, lighthearted. I didn't want to worry him, but in my mind I'm just thinking all I was doing was reading about the company picnic or something like that. He said, though, that he saw a hand reach into the crack of the door and turn off the light, and he thought that it was me playing with him. Here's the thing, though. The light, his light, was actually off, and he hadn't moved. His mask was in his lap, and he was still sitting underneath the covers in the same position, same spot. he had moved and the light was off now. I had to flip the switch to turn the light back on. Now, I personally only ever had one experience there. I was in the living room watching a movie. The work was done for the day, everybody's asleep, paperwork done, so I'm just killing some downtime, keeping myself awake, when I hear this crash come from around the corner. Around the corner is a dining room. In the dining room is the kitchen table, and on the other side of the room across from the entryway is a client's bedroom. My first thought was that he had gotten up and may have fallen, so I hurry over to check on him. I get to the entryway and I can see that his room door is still closed, but I can see this through a figure standing in the dining room by the table, a figure that turned to look at me. Its right side was to me, and then it turned its entire body to look at me, and I could see through it to the other side of the dining room to the client's closed bedroom door. I absolutely freaked at this, backed up a few feet, and then it was just gone. That is the only experience that I've ever had at that house. I have heard from the overnight staff there who replaced me that she has heard whistling though. Now, the rest of this I could excuse. I mean, he had cognitive impairment, my eyes were just playing tricks on me perhaps. She heard whistling from the outside and it sounded like it was from the dining room. But I can assure you that that light, it was off. And I purposefully left it on so that I could do my job a minute later. Yes, he was cognitively impaired, but he didn't see things. He had trouble with his memory, but again, he didn't see things. And that makes me wonder just how much of the other stuff that he was telling me was real. This story takes place in 2020, before the pandemic started. I had been working as a package delivery driver for about a year at this point. During this time, the area that I worked in included the downtown area of Fresno, California. Like many cities, our downtown area was not the best place to be day or night. Growing up near the area, I was no stranger to the rough environment that I was working in. After dealing with shootings, the homeless, drug addicts, and drug dealers, it was easy to say that it would take a lot to freak me out. I have had some other strange events happen to me in my life, some things I can't even really explain, but none of that was enough to prepare me for what happened on this day. So I had made good time on my route that day, as I had begun to grow accustomed to the monotonous area. The thing with package delivery too is that after a few weeks, you realize that it's always the same place that receives packages. Today was a little different though. I had been given a package for a church on a busy street that I had never been to before. Even though I had never been to this church before, I knew exactly where it was. I was also aware that it was near the railroad tracks and a pretty large homeless camp. This is an important detail too, as it will explain some of my thought processes and actions at the church. I made my way there around 2 p.m, knowing that once I was done with this stop, I would have to shoot back across town to do my pickups, then head home for the day. So, as I arrived, I grabbed the package, locked up my truck, and made my way to the entrance of the church. Now, something to note here is that I am not a very religious person at all. Was pretty much force-fed religion my whole life, and going to churches is not something that I'm really that fond of. I usually feel uncomfortable at any church, so the feeling of not wanting to go inside was not uncommon to me, but I had a job to do. Standing in front of this church, I noticed that the huge double doors were wide open, which to me meant that someone should be nearby and I could get this over and done with. Normally, though, I would have found this a bit strange, as it is a rough area after all, but it is a church too. Maybe they left the doors open to allow people who needed help to come in. I don't know. In any case, I made my way inside and was greeted by a giant mirror from floor to ceiling and 2 more doors on each side of it. Looking around this small entrance area, I was expecting to run into someone fairly quickly. However, the place seemed, well, deserted. I decided the best thing to do at this point was to call out and let whoever was there know that I was inside the building. Typically, I did this to avoid startling someone, especially down here. And as I waited a minute or two with no response, I figured that maybe whoever was here just couldn't hear me from where they were. Spending more than a couple of minutes at any stop could cause a ripple effect for the rest of the day, so I decided that I would walk around looking for, well, anyone. I decided that I should start with the doors that were right in front of me, figuring that this was the main part of the church and a good place to start. As I attempted to open the doors on both sides of the giant mirror, I found them to be both locked. I looked through the small glass windows and just saw rows and rows of chairs and a main stage area. Deciding to head left toward a small entryway, I realized that the two doors in there were the bathrooms. I knocked on both doors, hoping to hear some response, but was met with silence. As I returned to the main area, straight ahead of me was a dark hallway that I could barely make out that made a left turn at the end of it. At this point, being the only way to go, I decided that maybe the office was that way and it was the only place left that I hadn't checked. I made my way down the hallway, still calling out, hoping for any sign of anyone in the building. But as I approached the left turn of the hallway, the darkness seemed to swallow any and all light that attempted to make its way down that hallway. It was now, too, that I began to feel a sense of danger and a small tingling feeling that you get when you can sense something just isn't right, but ultimately chalked it up to just the darkness being a little bit creepy. At this point, I decided that it may be best to pull out my phone and use it as a flashlight since I couldn't see one foot in front of the other. Drivers aren't allowed to carry any type of weapons, but at least I had my phone out. As I turned my flashlight on and held it out, I noticed multiple doors all closed. I should have realized that this wasn't a good idea, but the work ethic in me said keep going and we get to drop this off and get out of here. As I continued forward, still announcing my presence, I reached the end of the hallway and noticed a door on the right with just the smallest amount of light under the door and a sign on the door saying courtyard. Figuring that this is why no one had responded to me, I went through that door. Upon entering the courtyard, I was greeted by the brightness of the sun and a bunch of dried up flowers. As my eyes readjusted to the sunlight, I noticed that this courtyard was enclosed by a fence, so the only way in or out was the door that I came from, and another door that was staring right at me straight across from me. To my disappointment, I was the only one standing out here. Figuring that since there is another building, surely whoever was here had to be in this other building. Not knowing what to expect in this other building, I approached the door and began to knock on it. Again, though, I was met with no response and decided to open the door. When I opened the door, the darkness that was waiting for me, ready to embrace me again like an old friend, was there again. Hesitating to enter, I called out a few more times to make my presence known, but silence again. Returning to the darkness, I immediately retrieved my cell phone, luckily with the flashlight still on. The hallway was a sort of T-shape, meaning straight ahead of me was a fire exit, with an indication of the faintest red light above the door, and another hallway on the left. With my light, even more dim than it was in the other building, I made my way, still calling out. Reaching the left turn on the hallway, I could make out, door after door, that they were all closed from as far as I could see. Knowing that I was reaching my own limit of being in this place, I decided to call out one more time. Expecting more silence, I stood there in the silence, waiting and listening. As a few seconds passed, I had decided that I'd had enough of this place now, when a loud clatter could be heard somewhere in the building. Instantly, my body tensed up as I remained still holding my flashlight down the hallway, the fear that I had been ignoring now reaching an all-time high. Within a few more seconds, I heard something slam seemingly even closer to me than the clatter had been. I even thought in my head, yelling to leave now, but my body was frozen in fear. Another slam even closer than the last brought me back to reality, though. The fear had finally won, and whoever or whatever was in here was getting closer to me with every second that passed, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out what it was. Running at the door that I had come in from, the blinding sunlight had never felt so welcoming. I knew that I couldn't stop yet though, because whatever made that noise in the other building was probably even closer now. I gave up trying to reason with myself that it was an employee and settled on some homeless or drug addict that had broken in and made their way back in there. Either way, I wasn't going to sit around and find out who this person was. I knew that I needed to make my way back to my truck, and I would just explain to my boss later that something weird was going on, and so I left. With my adrenaline still pumping, I ran to the other door and made my way inside the first building to make my way out. As the door behind me closed, I didn't bother to reach out for my phone, knowing the walk to the main entrance was only a short distance from where I was. As I began making my way down the hallway, my mind telling me to get out now, I was hit with what I can only describe as complete dread. I have experienced fear before, but this was something on a primordial level. Like, everything inside of me went off like alarms and my body had completely tensed up. A feeling as if something had grabbed my shoulders, my legs feeling weighted as if I was trying to walk through knee-high water in a swamp or something. I was met with an increasing amount of dread and sorrow that overwhelmed me to a point that I knew that I couldn't handle it much longer in this dark hallway. And then, all of a sudden, all I remember is I woke up in my truck, in a random neighborhood, about half a mile away from the church, and I was covered in sweat and I was crying uncontrollably. I felt terrible, as if every ounce of happiness had been drained from me, replaced with just hopelessness and sorrow. I began checking for my phone, and as I pulled it out of my pocket, my flashlight was still on. Which means that whatever happened to me, it did happen, and it wasn't some bad dream, confirmed as well by the package sitting in my passenger seat. As I accessed my phone to turn off the light, I then noticed that it happened to be 3 p.m., which means that I had lost an hour of my life with no memory of leaving the church or driving my truck to the location that I was currently in. Not knowing what to do, I called my girlfriend, wife now, and tried to explain to her what had happened. Speaking with her, I could feel the sorrow and the hopelessness leaving me, and I was finally able to get a grasp of my emotions and stop crying. I reached out to my best friend as well via text, since we worked together, and tried to explain it to him as well, since he had had some encounters in his life as well, and I knew that he would understand, or at the very least, hear me out. I have never stepped foot in that place since that event. I have driven past it, been near it, but I never had another delivery there again. The package that I had for them was eventually delivered by another driver who said that there was somebody in the main entrance and didn't even have to go inside the building. I have since moved out of Fresno, and even before I did, I was moved to a manager position, so I wasn't really delivering anymore. But I still have flashbacks to that place from time to time. They've gotten way less frequent over the years, but it still freaks me out. Sometime later as well, I talked to a friend who is a paranormal investigator, trying to get some answers about the whole thing. She explained to me that it sounded as if something attached itself to me that day. That churches can hold a lot of energy, and given the location of the church, it's not surprising if it had its fair share of sorrow and pain from those seeking help. This story has always been hard for me to talk about, because even to this day I have a hard time believing that it actually happened to me. But when it does come back, I always find myself asking the same questions. Like, how did I get back to my truck? How did I drive about half a mile away, and what the heck happened in that hour of time that I can't remember? So I don't believe in ghosts, but I also have never hallucinated before or ever again after this. Years ago, I was taking my parents' dog out the front yard to go and pee before putting her to bed. I was staying with them for a couple of months and about 26 or 27 at that time. At some point I noticed standing in front of the tree was the dark figure of a man. It was nighttime, so I didn't think too much of it. I mean, it was just a pure black figure. He was wearing a wide-brimmed hat like my dad has, so I naturally assumed that it was probably him. I was a little confused though why he would be outside like this, so I called out to him, "Hey Dad," but I didn't hear anything back. He just stood there as if he didn't hear me. I called out again, still nothing. Then I heard my dad talking, and it was coming from my parents' bedroom, so I quickly realized that whoever was standing there was a complete stranger on the property. Then he bent over and motioned to their dog as if asking her to come here, and even though she was standing on the driveway, she started peeing and her legs were trembling as if she was about to collapse. It was odd because she wasn't barking. It was though she was paralyzed in fear. I then got a closer look and could confidently see that this person wasn't a person, but rather a silhouette of one. At that, I ran as fast as I could inside. I came out just a moment later to look for the thing, and it was gone, and I didn't see it again. The only trace of the experience was the dog's pee on the driveway. Now, rationally, I know what happened was the fact that I was afraid of what seemed like an intruder, and their dog could probably sense that as well. I'm surprised that she didn't bark though. I mean, she's never really reacted this way to being scared. She's always barked like crazy when she is scared. I don't believe in ghosts or demons or evil spirits or anything like that. However, I will admit that it kind of feels like something along those lines. I assume that it was just a hallucination, even though I have no history of that and haven't hallucinated or had mental health problems since then either. But it's really the only explanation that I have. Frankly, I just brushed it off for years, and then I was watching a video compilation of scary stories one year on Halloween, and heard of the Hat Man and how people all over the world have seen pretty much exactly what I did. I'm still pretty secular when it comes to ghosts and stuff like that, but man, after hearing that, what other people had seen, and realizing that it was the exact same thing, if that wasn't the creepiest thing that I'd ever heard, then I don't know what is. It felt like something that a character would come across in a horror movie, not real life. Anyway, the whole thing's a bit embarrassing for me to share with other people, but like I said, I just can't get over the fact that there was something more to this, especially because, well, the dog saw it too, and the dog reacted so strangely. So I've played with Ouija boards numerous times with different friend groups, and nothing interesting has ever really happened. We'd either get no response or it would just spell out random things. This past Thanksgiving, a friend came over and after eating dinner, we wanted to give the Ouija board thing a try. Just a quick note about us too. My friend is an ex-Mormon who doesn't believe in the paranormal, and although I'm open to the idea of the paranormal phenomena, I have yet to personally experience anything that would be truly convincing, I guess you could say. Before beginning though, we set our intentions to speak with positive spirits only, and we agreed not to do anything obnoxious or weird like making fun of the board or spirits or asking questions that we shouldn't, like when will I die, how will I die, etc. And to my surprise, the planchette began moving shortly after we asked our first question, and the connection seemed consistent from there. The atmosphere was relaxed and warm, and among an array of questions, we asked questions about the individual that we were communicating with, and we also asked questions about ourselves that we knew the other person wouldn't know, and the board answered accurately. We were trying to think of some more questions when it started spelling out, "Help me," but with two L's. I know that this sounds so cliche, and if I ever write horror stories, I'm absolutely using this in a plot. But the chill environment became a bit eerie following this, and we asked with slight apprehension, "How can we help you?" And it responded, "Quit." My friend looked genuinely nervous, and I felt on edge as well. We agreed to listen to the response, but only after we asked one final question. We asked if it could share why it wanted us to quit. The first letters were SH, and I assumed it was going to tell us to shut up, but instead of going to the U, it ended up spelling SHATAN, like Shatan. My friend looked confused, and I asked her if she knew what the word meant, and she said that she didn't. I then told her that it could mean Satan in Arabic, and explained that it's a classification of jinn in Islam. If the board meant Satan, as in the pitchfork dude, then we both already knew what that meant. Either way, it wasn't good, and we kept our promise to stop after that last question. We made sure to thank the spirit for talking to us, and we said goodbye before closing the session. We know about the effect or explanations about connecting with the subconscious, but I think that it was particularly eerie that, 1, it started responding as we tried to think of more questions. 2, we both thought the board would spell out shut up as it went to SH, but instead it spelled shaitan. And all in all, it was a really interesting experience, but perhaps superstitiously, I almost feel like it was a warning, like it was warning me to not keep messing with the Ouija board, provided that it truly was something supernatural and not that subconscious stuff. Anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts about what you think about all of this and whether or not I should give it a go again. So, I've contemplated telling this story forever, it seems, because it just sounds not real. But I love this place so much, I've decided to share it here. When I was in high school, I worked at the local Pizza Hut, and I was a closing server, so after closing down the salad bar and mopping, I got out of there pretty late. I had this ritual of texting my dad when I was almost done to let him know that I was almost home, but mostly it was to test and see if him and my mum were awake or not. If they weren't, then I would take the long way home on the old country roads. I lived on a dog breeding farm 20 minutes outside of town, and I would smoke a joint or jam out or whatever. Now, one particular night I decided to do this, and I was riding along a back road about 3 to 4 minutes from my house. This is a road that I know very well, and my bus took this road my whole childhood. One thing to note about my area is that I live in the deep woods of East Texas, so most people who own property put their houses about maybe a quarter to half a mile back on the property, and keep their exposed woods as basically a natural fence and defense as well. So, while you can see a lot of driveways and mailboxes, you can see almost no houses, just pretty much woods with chunks taken out. Now, as I'm driving, I come upon a toolbox, like the ones that sit up in the back of a work truck, smack dab in the middle of the tiny dirt road. I pull up to it and stop and open my door, stepping out but not away from my car. And as I take in my obstacle, I realize my headlights are not the only light on the road. There are headlights, small ones, coming up a driveway that was parallel with the toolbox. I quickly sit back down in my car and close my door till only a crack is open so that in a moment's notice I can close it, go off into the grass and get the heck out of there if need be, when a small riding wheel lawnmower comes out of the trees, and riding it is a man in a full clown suit and a mask with a shotgun laid across his lap. He turns and looks directly through my windscreen and into my eyes and brings the shotgun up out of his lap. Now, I am a country boy through and through. I can smell when I'm somewhere that I'm not wanted, so before he even got the butt of that thing to his shoulder, my car was in drive and in the side ditch of the road. I got out of there, threw my joint out, went home, crawled into bed, and never really spoke about it again. I still don't know what that guy was doing, seeing as this was probably 2018 to 19, so after the killer clown craze. Whether it was a dumb kid or some crazy backwoods man, I'm not really sure, but I'm really glad that I never ran into him again. So, I haven't shared this with anyone because, well, I don't want to seem crazy. I'm just looking for some opinions, I guess, if this was a prank or what. I waited to share this because I was just so freaked out and I didn't know if any of them recognized my car or something. Anyway, so I'm not sure where to start, but I'll do my best. So I live in northern Minnesota in a decent-sized town, 15,000. However, outside of town is extremely rural, with very low populations in the surrounding towns. This happened on the 21st of June, like around 1 or 2 in the morning. So I had training for work down in the Twin Cities at the beginning of that week, and hit the road to head back north at around 9 or so. It's about a 4-hour drive north. The first half of the drive is mostly highway, and then the second half is more of a rural 2-lane road, but still a common road traveled. I'm not sure if any of you have driven in Minnesota, but there are deer everywhere, so I was staying pretty attentive on keeping my eyes peeled for something possibly running across the road. What to look for are their eyes when it's dark, as they tend to stick out in the ditch and you're able to spot them before passing them. So I was on a stretch of road without a town for about 30 miles in all directions, when I noticed a glow in the woods, which was some type of bonfire inside the woods. But also there was a group of people standing in the ditch forming a line towards the woods. I thought that they were deer at first. These are dense woods too, big pine trees, so you can see into the woods fairly easily. I slowed down because I guess I thought that maybe they needed help or whatever. I'm going to try my best to explain it because my headlights were facing forward, so I could only make out one person clearly, and couldn't see too much detail for the other people, as they were farther away in the ditch closer to the woods. But they were lined up in a row facing the road, but forming a line heading into the woods. They had their heads down looking at the ground, but for each person that was closer to the woods, they were closer to the ground. First person straight up, and then the next looked somewhat hunched over, and then I think the people close to the woods were kneeling. It was hard to make out their age, but I had to guess maybe middle-aged, but I'm not positive. I really could only make out the first person's outfit, but they had on what looked like a white robe with a black sash around it. The sash had a symbol of what looked like a robot, or some type of figurine with its hands facing out, sitting down. There was other imagery on the sash, but I was only stopped for maybe 10 seconds trying to process everything. Also, these people never acknowledged me, as far as I'm aware anyway, just didn't even move whatsoever. I was pretty much frozen with fear, as obviously this is quite abnormal and nothing like I've ever witnessed or heard about here. So I promptly left after I got my focus regained on the road. I tried telling myself that it was some hoax or maybe some different people camping, but it was just too odd and it just seemed like that was not the case. So I guess I'm just wondering if anyone else has experienced something like this or heard about it. And if you have, and if you know anything, well, what is it? I've lived in many haunted houses all my life, each with their own experiences and stories, but for the most part human in nature. This, though, was the first time that I experienced something that I would call inhuman. My dad was in the army at the time and had been stationed to a base in South Carolina. He found a house for rent and showed us pictures of it. It was a single story at the end of a roundabout in the middle of the woods. You can see the other house off in the distance through the trees. I looked at the pictures, and whenever I looked at the pictures of the outside, a voice in my head would start screaming at me, "It's in the woods, it's in the woods." Nothing on the inside, just the outside. When we got there, as we were unpacking, a cop pulled up too. I never got out of the car, but talked to my mum through the window about how he knew the previous owners and just wanted to check on things. We never saw the cop again after that, but it was weird. Anyway, whenever I go outside, I would get the sensation that something was hiding in the tree line and that it wanted me to follow it. I felt like it was trying to be playful and mischievous. I would also see figures walking by the windows and heard scratching from outside even. One night, I woke up hearing something moving around outside. I went to look outside, peeking through the blinds, and I saw something crouching in front of the window. If it was standing, it would have been on two legs and at least 7 feet tall. Given I could see the silhouette of shoulders and knees, I could also see that whatever it was covered in fur. Obviously, I was pretty freaked out. Days later, my parents had taken my brother to the airport as well, and I was home alone. I was doing laundry, and I saw that my room was brighter than normal for some reason. I figured that I must have left my bedside lamp on, so I went to go and turn it off. I stood in my doorway and saw that my lamp was off. Looking up, my ceiling light, which had never worked since we moved in, was on. I texted my mum asking if she had the light fixed, and she said no. That was really weird because we checked that later as well, and that line was broken. Eventually, I left for army basic training, but my mum kept up to date on what was going on there, and she said that she was hearing the scratches and the noises now that I used to hear. One night, she was talking to my dad by the door and said that they both heard someone run up on the porch and rattle the door handle. My dad whipped open the door, but when he did, there was nothing there. We never got any answers to what was in the woods or the house, but it was my first experience with something that honestly felt inhuman.